If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, Sasuke. The day Sasuke was born, July 23rd, was a momentous one for the Uchiha clan. A welcoming party had been arranged for those close to the main family, meaning a group of 10, maybe 12, people were invited to attend. I had been pleased to know the third child of the Uchiha main family had been named Sasuke, because it meant my limited knowledge wasn't as useless as I had started to believe. Though Mito's birth had shown me not to trust too much in said events, leaving them as nothing but very loose guidelines of what could or could not happen. Today, it's been a little over a month since little Sasuke was born, and the weather was warm, typical for a summer evening in Konoha. Lanterns hung around the compound, casting a soft, golden glow. The fragrance of blooming flowers mingled with the aroma of the feast prepared for the occasion. It was a celebration of new life, of hope, and of the future. A celebration just as big as the one they had thrown for the little princess. I stood near the entrance, watching as guests arrived, each bringing gifts and congratulations. Among them was Kushina Uzumaki, her presence impossible to miss. She moved with an energy that belied her heavily pregnant state, her vibrant red hair flowing behind her like a fiery banner. Kushina was 7, maybe 8, months along, her belly pronounced beneath her flowing dress. Kushina! Mikoto called out, her face lighting up with a smile as she approached her friend. I'm so glad you could make it. Kushina grinned, placing a hand on her round belly. Like I would miss the chance to meet little Sasuke, you know. She replied, her voice full of warmth. Besides, this one, she patted her belly gently, needs to get used to all the noise and excitement. Mikoto chuckled, her eyes softening as she looked at Kushina. How are you feeling? You look radiant. Oh, you know, the usual, Kushina said with a wink. Kicking, cravings, and all that fun stuff. But I'm good. Minato's been fussing over me like a mother hen, you know. At this, Kushina leaned forward, whispering, does it hurt as much as people say? Mikoto smiled mischievously at that. I wouldn't want to ruin the surprise for you. Well now, that's just mean. Kushina pouted, playfully swatting Mikoto's arm. Kushina. My mother called from within the house, having noticed her loud friend had arrived. Please come inside. We have a special seat for you. Come, let's get you settled, Mikoto said, guiding Kushina towards a comfortable seat. You shouldn't be standing too much. I couldn't help but smile at the scene, the genuine affection between them. It was heartwarming to see. Things had changed a lot during these past few months. For one, I was finally 6 and so was Itaki. 2. I had started my training with Teresa, which usually took place right after my training with Itaki. At first, the entire ordeal had been somewhat complicated, seeing she didn't really have a body, and I had to learn by following instructions, which sometimes was hard considering most of the things we did were physical. But after a while, Teresa and I found a rhythm, making the learning experience altogether easier. Not only that, but the village now had a new Hokage. Namikaze Minato, Konoha's yellow flash. I had seen that coming from a mile away, and it had nothing to do with my meta-knowledge, but more with the fact that Minato was extremely popular in the village, while his contender for the position, Orochimaru, was the opposite. I will be honest, I was surprised to learn that Orochimaru was still in the village. People didn't talk about him, and he's not one to make public appearances, so it took me by surprise that he was still part of Konoha when my father told me he was Minato's competition for the role of 4th Hokage. My only knowledge of the guy, meta-wise, was that he was a villain, so, it was a bit of a surprise. That begs the question, does Orochimaru betray the village because he didn't get the Hokage position, or was he already a traitor and the outcome of who became the 4th Hokage changed nothing at all? I sighed, pushing my questions aside for the time being. I mean, it's not like I would be able to answer my own questions, considering how limited my information, at the end of the day, is. Smiling, I made my way to the center of the gathering, where Itaka stood beside his father, Fugaku. Both wore expressions of pride for the occasion, though Itaka's was more subdued compared to his father's usual stoic demeanor. Itaki, I called out, approaching my friend. Congratulations on becoming a big brother, again. Itaka turned to me, a small smile touching his lips. Thanks, again. Any reason why he was named after the 3rd Hokage's father? I replied, glancing towards the cradle where Sasuke lay. Perhaps I was reading too much between the lines, but the fact that the two newest members of the main family had been named after shinobi from other clans seemed rather strange to me. My leading theory was that Fugaku was trying to win some favor in doing so, though why exactly, I wasn't sure. At first, I hadn't looked too much into the situation, seeing Kushina was an Uzumaki and one of the best friends of Mikoto. So at the time, I simply assumed the naming of the little princess was nothing more than a show of friendship between Kushina and Mikoto. However, that theory went out the window the moment Sasuke was born. It's a good name, Fugaku interjected from Itaka's side, his gaze fixed on the tiny form of Sasuke swaddled in the cradle, a small frown on his face. Sarutobi Sasuke was a renowned shinobi, known for his bravery and power. A name carries a lot of weight and expectations. It also shows the Uchiha's dedication to the village. The words hung in the air, a tangible affirmation of my leading theory. Meaning there were some problems between the clan and the village. I wonder what exactly? I suppose there was no point in worrying. Politics was a complicated affair, one that I had faith Lord Fugaku and Lady Mikoto were more than equipped to handle. Besides, even if I wanted to help, there wasn't much I could do. I had as much political pull as the next civilian, all I could do is hope for the best and be ready for the worst. How is your training with your new strange blade going? Itaki asked, tilting his head. Claymore, is it? I nodded, smiling at him. It's going well. I still remember the day that I asked my father to make me the Claymore under Teresa's instructions. Flashback. 5 months ago. 5 months ago, I found my father in his workshop, a small but well-equipped space where he spent most of his time crafting various tools and weapons for the shinobi of the village. The rhythmic sound of hammer on metal greeted me as I stepped inside, a familiar and comforting noise. Father, I called out, walking towards him. He looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow. Champ, what brings you here? Did you miss your old man or something? I smiled, gathering my thoughts before stepping forward. I have a request. His eyebrows raised in curiosity. Oh? And what might that be? I want you to make me a weapon, I said, my voice firm with resolve. A specific kind of sword that I created. His expression shifted to one of mild surprise and intrigue. An original design. I pulled out a carefully drawn design from my pocket and handed it to him, one that I had painstakingly made following Teresa's instructions. He studied the paper, his eyes narrowing in concentration. The design was for a claymore, a large double-edged sword that seemed out of place in this world of kunao and katanas. This is quite an unusual design, he remarked, glancing up at me. Where did you come up with this? I've been thinking about it for a while, I replied, lying through my teeth. I feel it's a weapon that would suit my style and abilities. I know it seems strange, but I believe it's what I need. Based on the design alone, I can tell you this. Claymore of yours is going to be extremely heavy compared to any sword you have used so far, he said methodically, tracing the drawing with his calloused fingers. You understand that, right? Teresa had said that much, so I nodded. The measurements of the design also seem to imply you want to use the blade from now until you're an adult, he continued, his fingers gliding over the two-dimensional sword. The length, the weight distribution, it's all built for a grown man, not a child. I nodded again. I understand. He watched me for a moment, his brows furrowed. I'm going to need a lot of chakra steel of the highest quality, alongside other materials. So that means you're going to make it? I asked, unable to hide my excitement. He studied me for a moment, his gaze penetrating as if trying to read my thoughts. Then, with a nod, he said, You've never asked for anything before. Takeshi. If this is what you want, I'll make it for you, but you will learn with me how to make it, in case your old man isn't around. Consider it a father-son bonding activity. I nodded, smiling at him. I would be honored to learn by your side, old man. He returned my smile with a nod of understanding. It will take some time, but I'll make sure it's done right. My son's first custom weapon deserves to be crafted with care and with the best materials at my disposal. Back to the present. The sword was still bigger than me, being around 170 centimeters long, but I was getting used to using my claymore, despite how big it was. The sword in question had taken my father months to finish, mostly because he was teaching me how to do so along the way. Do you want to carry Sasuke? Itaki asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. It seemed he had taken Sasuke from his cradle while I was reminiscing about things. No thanks, I replied, shaking my head. Unlike Mito, Sasuke seemed to hate me, always squirming and scowling whenever I tried to hold him or interact with him. His entire body language screamed he didn't like me that much, from his sharp, hesitant glances to the scrunched-up look of distaste on his face every time I crossed his line of sight. It was clear as the day that baby Sasuke was thrilled by my presence. Maybe that would change in time, but until that happened, I would keep my distance from him. He likes me more than you, Itachi commented with a smug smirk, cradling the infant with practiced ease. Sasuke gurgled happily in his brother's arms, far from the scowls he seemed to reserve only for me. I'm aware, I replied. It seems that unlike your sister, he just has terrible taste. Chapter 22, Chapter 19, I Want a Cat. Today, like any other day, after my training with Itachi, I came to the forest alone to train with Teresa, the not-so-imaginary friend inside my head. Right now, I stood in a clearing deep within the forest, away from prying eyes. The sun filtered through the dense trees, casting shadows on the ground. I could feel the weight of the claymore in my hands, as I panted, my muscles aching from the exertion. Tired already? Teresa questioned, tilting her head playfully. A bit, but I'll manage, I replied, taking a deep breath. The key to mastering the Phantom Mirage is not just speed but precision and control, Teresa repeated, for like the 10th time today. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The technique Teresa was teaching me, the Phantom Mirage, was one of the many techniques she knew. She didn't really use it because her natural speed was more than sufficient for anything she ever had to deal with. I was already able to use the Phantom Mirage. It had taken me less than 2 days to learn how to use it, but being able to use the technique and mastering it were two entirely different things in the eyes of Teresa. The process entailed a split-second burst of chakra enhancing my speed to the point that I leave an afterimage of myself. The problem came with repetitive use. I was able to use the Phantom Mirage around 35 times, maybe 40 if I didn't come particularly tired from my training with Itachi that day, before I started to show clear signs of exhaustion. There was also the fact that the Phantom Mirage had some movement problems. It didn't allow for free movement just yet, meaning I had to stop for a second to change my trajectory before using the technique again. For Teresa, this was unacceptable. Her goal was simple, me mastering the technique to the point it would allow for more precise movements and, most importantly, near limitless usage. We wouldn't stop practicing until the Phantom Mirage became second nature to me, going from a technique to a movement as natural as breathing. Start with the basics, Teresa instructed, pointing at one of the trees ahead of me. Visualize your target and move with purpose. Speed alone won't suffice if your movements are erratic. Nodding, I pushed off the ground, using the technique. One moment I was standing still, the next I was on the other side of the clearing. Wasting no time, I turned on my heel, using the Phantom Mirage once more to return to my original position. I repeated this process again and again, a blur of motion in the otherwise serene forest, feeling how, with each new burst, my chakra reserves dwindled, draining faster. Maintaining control over the technique became significantly harder. Again, Teresa said. Remember, precision and control. You are putting too much emphasis on the energy aspect of the technique when the technique itself doesn't necessarily need chakra or yoki to be used. Your chakra is just there to increase the efficiency of it, if needed. I gritted my teeth and tried again. This time, I concentrated on the flow of my movements, trying to accomplish the technique with nothing but physical effort. I moved swiftly, but slower than usual, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of an afterimage lingering behind me. Better, Teresa acknowledged. But you need to sustain it. Keep your movements fluid and continuous. Though credit where it's due, you almost managed to use the technique without chakra. Hours passed as I continued to practice, each attempt bringing me closer to the goal. Teresa was an unforgiving teacher, pushing me to my limits and beyond with no qualms for anything. Despite the exhaustion, I felt a strange exhilaration, a sense of progress and growth that spurred me on. You're improving, Teresa noted, a faint smile on her face. Eventually, you should be able to take it up a notch. Combining your speed with your strikes, making your afterimages an extension of your attacks. That sounded unimaginably cool, and I wanted that now. After hours of training with Teresa, I started my way back home, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I was learning more and more as the days went by. I could honestly feel my abilities growing stronger each day. As I walked through the familiar streets of Konoha, spotting a black cat on my way, I found my thoughts drifting towards something else, something I had been wanting for a long time but my parents kept saying no to, a pet. I had always loved animals, especially cats, and the idea of having a little companion was appealing. I had asked my parents multiple times before, but they had always refused, citing various reasons. However, today was a new day. With my spirits high from the progress in my training, I felt a renewed determination to ask them once more. Besides, even if they said no, I could always ask them another day. There was nothing to lose, but a lot to gain here. Smiling, I entered our home. My parents were in the living room, my mother reading a book while my father worked on some documents regarding some orders for his shop. They looked up as I walked in, their expressions softening into smiles. "Welcome back, Takeshi," my mother said warmly. "How was training?" "Tiring but productive," I replied, placing my claymore by the door. "I've been making progress." My father nodded approvingly. "Good to hear. You've been working hard." "As expected of my boy, soon he will be working the ladies of Konoha hard, hee, like his old man in his prime." My mother glared at him for his crude remark, causing my father to chuckle sheepishly. "That was until I met you, honey, you know that," my father added hastily, trying to appease my mother while flashing her a sheepish grin from across the room. She simply rolled her eyes in response, but I caught the ghost of a smile pulling at the corners of her lips. I just sighed and rolled my eyes at the scene, used to his odd sense of humor. Then again, he seemed very serious every time he said things like this. I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you both about." My mother raised an eyebrow, setting her book aside. "Oh? What is it, dear?" "I was thinking," I began, choosing my words carefully, "about getting a pet. A cat, specifically." Both my parents exchanged glances, my mother's face immediately showing concern. "Takeshi, you know I'm allergic to cats," she said gently. "I know, Mom," I replied quickly. "But I've been reading about hypoallergenic cats. They produce fewer allergens and might not trigger your allergies as much. And I've really wanted a pet for a long time. I promise I'll take full responsibility for it." My father leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've asked about this before," he said slowly. "And we've always said no. But you've proven yourself to be responsible and dedicated to anything you start, so if you can find a cat that won't trigger your mother's allergies, we might consider it." I smiled. "Really?" My mother sighed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "If it makes you this happy, we can at least look into it. But the moment it affects my health, we'll have to reconsider." "I understand," I said, trying to keep my excitement in check. "Thank you, both of you." The very next day, we visited the local animal shelter. Why so soon? I was not going to let my parents change their minds. The staff was helpful, guiding us to the section where they kept hypoallergenic breeds. Among them was a small, black, sleek cat with bright green eyes and a curious demeanor. I felt an immediate connection. "She's perfect," I said, looking at my parents hopefully. She had all the requirements they had put for a potential pet. She was hypoallergenic, was potty trained, and was adorable. That last one was a me requirement, but potato. My mother knelt down, reaching out to the cat. The little feline sniffed her hand before nuzzling against it, purring. My mother's smile widened. "She is quite adorable." It was almost as if the little cat knew it depended on my mom whether or not if she was adopted. My father nodded in agreement. "All right, Takeshi. If this is what you want, we'll take her home. But remember, you have to take care of her, feed her, clean after her, everything, the entire deal." "Are you guys sure you want this little gal?" one of the staff members asked, looking between my parents and me. "Yes," I answered definitively, grinning as I looked down at the black furry creature that was now playfully batting at the edges of my mother's scarf. "We're sure." From there on, things moved fast. Or maybe I was just hyper for having a pet. Who knows? The only thing I know is that I could hardly contain my joy as we completed the adoption process and brought the cat home. I named her Tsuki, which meant moon. I know, a cliché, overly used name, but I liked it, and that was enough for me. "We need to buy a few things for her," my father said, looking over at Tsuki as she pounced on a tiny speck of dust, her green eyes filled with playful determination for world domination. food, a litter box, toys. My mother nodded in agreement. I saw some pet stores on the main street when we were out for a walk last week. We could go there. I nodded, smiling at them. Later that night, after having set up all the things Tsuki needed in my room, from her litter box to her food, water, and toys, I laid on my bed, watching Tsuki explore my room, her tail twitching with curiosity as she ventured into every corner, under every piece of furniture. Her green eyes shimmering in the low light, catching glimmers from the moon that streamed in through my window. "You are the most adorable thing in Konoha, you know that?" I asked, watching her do her thing. Tsuki's ears perked up at the sound of my voice, her whiskers twitching as she glanced my way. She seemed to consider my words as if understanding them before letting out a small, appreciative mew, quickly vanishing under my desk. I had always wanted a pet, and now I had it. Of course, being a shinobi in training meant I had to balance care for Tsuki with my daily training and studies. I wasn't too worried about it though. If my schedule ever became too tight, I could always use a clone. Before I could ponder on that thought for much longer, a strange sensation washed over me. My senses, honed by the rigorous training with Teresa, were now finely tuned to detect even the subtlest shifts in chakra around me. And right now, something felt off. I closed my eyes, extending my awareness outward, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but definitely there, a chakra signature appearing and disappearing at the edges of the village, sometimes inside the village in different locations like the Uchiha district, the memorial stone, and a few different places I didn't know. The pattern was erratic, and the sensation reminded me of Minato's jutsu, but in a different way. Maybe I was wrong comparing the sensations, seeing I had only seen the Hiraishin in action on 2 occasions, both where Minato was showing Itaki and me his technique under Kushina's request to show us how awesome he was. But the sensation behind this chakra felt remarkably similar to the sensation Hiraishin left behind after being used, at least, on a fundamental level. The Hiraishin and this strange chakra felt like something vanishing out of existence before reappearing somewhere else. Perhaps whoever was entering the village was using a technique similar to the Hiraishin, meaning that whoever I was feeling was possibly using space-time ninjutsu to do what he was doing. I furrowed my brow, focusing harder. This chakra signature was different from anything I had encountered before. It wasn't just the strangeness of its behavior, but the quality of the chakra itself. It felt unearthly, unnatural, almost alien, compared to the familiar energies of those within Konoha. This was a security concern. I had to let someone know. Fugaku was the head of Konoha's police, and Minato was the Hokage and the only expert in space-time ninjutsu in the entire village. I had to let them know. Whoever this intruder was, they were skilled, evidently more skilled than I was prepared for. Based on how they moved, they knew how Konoha's security operated, at least enough to know where to go without a patrol seeing them. I had a bad feeling about this. Chapter 23, Chapter 20, The Nine Tails. It had been 2 months since I first felt that strange chakra signature at the edges of the village. 2 months since I reported it to Minato and Fugaku. During that time, the village had been on high alert, yet the signature had vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving no trace. Maybe the new security measures Minato put in place had stopped the intruder from entering Konoha again, or maybe the extra patrols of the Konoha police had done the trick. Either way, I hadn't felt the foreign chakra ever since. Today, I found myself on the forest grounds once more, wielding my Claymore. The weapon felt familiar now, easier to use, thanks to the countless hours spent training with Teresa's guidance. As usual, I practiced the Phantom Mirage technique alongside some sword forms, my movements swift and fluid as Teresa's voice echoed in my mind, offering corrections and encouragement. "Your form is improving, but you need to be quicker. Speed is your greatest ally with this technique. Otherwise, you might find yourself jumping into your enemy's attacks." I nodded, adjusting my stance and pushing myself harder. The technique required incredible speed and precision, creating afterimages to confuse the opponent. It was a skill that demanded not just physical prowess but also a sharp mind, precise chakra control, and keen reflexes. Day by day, using the technique without exerting myself became easier. "Good, now again," Teresa said, and I complied, my body moving faster, creating an afterimage. "Not bad. In a few months, you should have this technique in the bag." After a grueling session, I paused to catch my breath, wiping sweat from my brow. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the village. I glanced toward the direction of the Uchiha compound, wondering if Itachi was training as well. Our sessions together had grown less frequent ever since Sasuke's birth, mostly because Fugaku was starting to teach him the clan techniques, but we still pushed each other to our limits whenever we had the chance. As a rule, we had 2 spars a week, regardless of how many training sessions we had together that week. As I made my way back home, my thoughts drifted to the strange chakra signature I had felt months ago. Despite the village's best efforts, there had been no further sightings or traces of it. It was as if it had vanished into thin air, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. Perhaps I was overthinking it. But still. Upon reaching home, I was greeted by the sight of my parents in the living room. My mother was knitting, a rare moment of relaxation for her, while my father was reading a book on weapon crafting, the one he had recently written and published. "You're back," my mother said, looking up from her knitting. "How was training?" "Intense," I replied, taking a seat beside her. "But I'm getting better." "Good to hear," my father said, not looking up from his book. "I have to say, this book is awesome." I snorted. "Didn't you write that book?" "Yes," he replied with an unabashed smile, his eyes still on the pages, which explains why it is so awesome. A low chuckle escaped my lips before I shook my head, a fond smile playing on my face. It was just like my father to find his own work awesome. But I suppose there was a certain degree of character in finding pleasure in one's own work. "I'll be in my room if you need me," I said, running up the stairs to my room. I entered my room, the setting sun casting a warm glow through the wooden slats of my window. The familiar scent of aged paper, faint smoke from incense sticks, and a hint of Tsuki's musky fur filled my senses. I let out a sigh, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift off my shoulders as I jumped onto my bed. I could feel Tsuki rouse from where she had been snoozing on her favored spot on my tatami mat. Even with my eyes closed, I could sense her adorable padded footsteps approaching me. No sooner had my body hit the soft mattress when Tsuki was already in the bed with me, purring. I ran a hand across the smooth, soft fur of her back, feeling her muscles tense beneath my touch. Then she released a rumbling purr, curling comfortably by my side. "How was your day, princess?" I asked in one of those voices you only use for your pets. Tsuki merely nuzzled closer to my chest in response, her purrs growing louder. "Lazy day, hey." I laughed lightly, and she seemed to agree with a soft meow. Mine was pretty much as usual, training until my curfew. Heaving a sigh, I let my gaze stray to the window and the waning light outside as I continued to pet my cat. Sufficiently tired from the day's rigorous training, sleep threatened to pull me under its tranquil sway. As I lay in the calming silence of my room, my cat cuddling against me, my thoughts spiraled back to my earlier contemplations. I knew there was no point in worrying, seeing I had done everything that I could to stop whoever that stranger had been. But even then, I couldn't help but feel this strange sense of foreboding that something was going to happen, and that this stranger would be the one behind it. I sighed once more. "There's no point in worrying, right, you evil furball?" I cooed at Tsuki, who seemed to understand my mood as she nudged her head against my hand, demanding more pets like a spoiled little princess. Needless to say, I obliged and soon found myself sinking into a peaceful slumber. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding in my chest. As a familiar yet unsettling sensation washed over me. The same strange chakra signature I had felt 2 months ago was back. I sat up, my senses on high alert. I reached out with my senses, trying to pinpoint its location. The chakra signature was close to Kushina, who was, in a different location. As I tried to pinpoint where she was exactly, my blood ran cold as I felt several Konoha chakra signatures around Kushina suddenly disappear, their lights extinguished as if snuffed out. The strange signature had killed them. The only chakras left were Minato's, Kushina's, the stranger's, and a new, small chakra. Could it be Kushina's and Minato's kid? I hadn't seen her in a month, but considering how big she was the last time I saw her, she had to be due any time soon. Was this the intent behind the attacker? To attack while she was vulnerable? If so, why? What could this enemy possibly achieve by attacking the entire village on its own? The Nine Tails. Their objective isn't Kushina, but the tailed beast. Today is the day of the Nine Tails attack. Chapter 24, Chapter 21, The Nine Tails, Part 2. I sat there for a moment, paralyzed, my mind racing, trying to find something I could do to help the situation. I reached out with my senses again, trying to get a clearer picture. The chakra signatures near Kushina were fluctuating wildly, a clear sign of a fierce battle. Minato's chakra was strong, but there was an edge of desperation to it. The enemy's chakra was dark and twisted, a malevolent force that made my skin crawl. The new, small chakra signature was weak but steady. Naruto was still alive and well. As I sat there, helpless in my room, I felt a surge of frustration. I wanted to do something, to help in some way, but I knew that rushing in blindly would only make things worse. I needed to trust Minato, to believe that he could handle the situation. This was a fight well beyond my capabilities. I needed to focus on what I could do, not on what I couldn't. I could help those that I knew would believe my word at face value, prepare for the imminent threat. My parents and the Uchiha, I had to alert them. That was something I could do. In a swift motion, I turned and headed for my closet, retrieving my backpack that lay half buried under a pile of worn-out training gear, before gently picking up Tsuki, who had stirred from her peaceful slumber. Her luminous green eyes blinked open at me, a low purr rumbling in her throat as our gazes locked. "Sorry, Tsuki," I whispered, cradling her in my arms. "We've got to move." I had trained her for this, in the unlikely case I ever had to evacuate the village. Tsuki let out a small mew of protest from her comfortable spot, but obediently scrambled up onto my shoulder, her tiny claws digging into the fabric of my shirt. I carefully placed her into the backpack, poking her head through the gap in the half-closed zipper so she could see. Her curious green eyes blinked at me from the darkness of the bag. I spared one last glance around my room, making sure I didn't need anything else, before grabbing my claymore and running downstairs. "Mom! Dad!" I called out, all but shouting, my voice echoing through the silent house. They emerged from their room, startled by the urgency in my tone. Their eyes widened at the sight of me, fully dressed with my sword and backpack. "Champ," my father started, his gruff voice heavy with concern. "What's going on?" "There's no time to explain in detail," I cut him off, flinching at the harshness of my own voice. I took a deep breath to calm my racing heart. "The village. We're under attack. We need to alert Lord Fugaku about it so he can start the evacuation. Lord Fourth is fighting the enemy, and I have a feeling the enemy's goal is to release the Nine Tails upon the village. There's no time to waste." "Kushina!" Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes welling up with fear, seemingly coming to the same conclusion I had. Attacking right now ensured the fourth Hokage couldn't completely focus on fighting the enemy, meaning his focus would be divided between his wife, his child, the enemy, and the looming threat of the Nine Tails if he didn't solve the situation. "I'll alert the Jounin commander. You and Mother go to the Uchiha compound," Father said, his stern voice breaking the tense silence that had enveloped us. Without wasting another moment, he disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving behind only the faint smell of burning wood. Mom was already moving too, her usually calm face set in grim determination. We arrived at the Uchiha compound within minutes. The compound was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Rushing past the guards, I hurried to Fugaku's house, my mother close behind me, our footsteps echoing as we jumped from building to building. "Lord Fugaku! Lady Mikoto!" I called out, pounding on the door. The door slid open, revealing a sleepy and disheveled Fugaku. His eyes widened as he took in our frantic expressions. "Takeshi? What is it?" he asked, his voice laced with concern as he looked around, almost as if expecting someone to be following us. "There's no time to explain in detail, Fugaku-sama," I said quickly. "The village is under attack. The fourth Hokage is engaged with the enemy, and I have reason to believe their goal is to release the Nine Tails. We need to evacuate and prepare for the worst." Fugaku's eyes narrowed, and he nodded sharply. "Mikoto, wake the clan. We need to organize an evacuation and defense strategy immediately." I was glad no one was questioning how I knew about the Nine Tails. Maybe Kushina had told them, including my family, about the night we met and how I had sensed something wrong in her chakra. I honestly didn't care about the reason at the moment. If I had to be interrogated for this later on, I would gladly answer their questions. Lady Mikoto appeared behind Fugaku, her eyes wide with alarm. She nodded and, without a word, hurried off to rouse the rest of the clan. Fugaku turned to me, his expression stern. "Takeshi, I appreciate the warning. You will stay inside the clan and help only if absolutely necessary," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Of course," I replied, hoping that what little I was doing would be enough to control some of the damage of what was about to happen. Fugaku then turned to my mother. My, he began, his stern exterior softening slightly, would you prefer to stay within the compound or help with the evacuation of the village populace? My mother didn't hesitate before responding. With all due respect, Lord Fugaku, I want to assist in the evacuation. I cannot sit idle while our home is under threat. Fugaku nodded at her words. Very well. Coordinate with Mikoto for the evacuation strategy. Ensure everyone gets out safely. His gaze shifted back to me. Takeshi, go with Itaki and help him protect Mito and Suzuki. I bowed respectfully. Yes, sir. Entering their house, I found Itaki already awake, his normally calm eyes reflecting the anxiety he was trying to suppress. I could see him struggling to put on a brave face for his little brother and sister, but the worry etched into his features was evident. Meaning that he had sensed something was wrong, just like me, though unlike me, he wasn't a censor. He looked relieved to see me. Takeshi, he said, his voice steady despite everything. You carry Mito, and I'll carry Suzuki. I nodded, moving towards Mito's crib, who was already awake, happily throwing her arms my way, oblivious to the impending danger. Itaka did the same, swiftly moving to Sasuke's side. The 3-month-old had begun to wail, almost as if sensing the tension in the air. Gently, I picked Mito up, cradling her close to my chest. Her large, inquisitive eyes met mine, a soft gurgle escaping her lips as she reached out a chubby hand to play with a loose strand of my hair. My heart clenched at her innocence, perhaps it was best if she didn't know what was happening. Ready? Itaki asked, his voice barely audible over Sasuke's cries. Yes, I replied with a short nod. Does your clan have an evacuation zone, or do we need to wait for your mother's orders? Itaka nodded, adjusting Suzuki in his arms. There's a safe zone at the edge of the forest where we're supposed to gather. Mother will send word once everyone is accounted for. With that, we moved quickly through the Uchiha compound, which was now stirring with life. Men and women hurried around in their black and red attire, corralling their children and gathering their belongings with stern faces set in grim determination. The sounds of frightened cries and hurried footsteps echoed through the darkened streets as other members of the Uchiha clan emerged from their homes, the children and the elders following Fugaku's planned path towards safety, while the others went out to assist the village. As the evacuation efforts continued, the air grew thick with tension and the sense of impending danger loomed over us. The Uchiha safe zone, a fortified area within the compound, was full of activity as people hurried to secure their families and prepare for the worst. I was helping guide some of the younger children when it happened. A sudden, chilling sensation washed over me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I froze, my senses heightened, and rattled, feeling something break. I could feel a void. It was as if a gaping emptiness had suddenly appeared in the middle of the village, a vacuum that seemed to pull at everything around it. And then, almost immediately, it was filled by an immense, overwhelming presence. A massive amount of chakra, unlike anything I had ever felt before, surged through the village. The sheer intensity of it was staggering, nearly knocking the breath out of me. I stumbled, clutching my chest as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The 9 tails had been released. The 4th Hokage had failed in stopping the enemy. The next thing I felt was a massive roar, followed by a maelstrom of pure malice and fury. It was like standing at the edge of an erupting volcano, the heat and pressure threatening to consume everything in its path. The sheer hatred and anger radiating from the 9 tails chakra was palpable, a dark, oppressive force that seemed to choke the very air around us. Takeshi! Itaka called out, his voice strained with worry. Snapping back to reality, I saw the panic that had descended over the safe zone. Shouts and cries filled the air as people ran towards their loved ones, comforting children and holding their families close. As I turned back to the village, my eyes caught the sight of the beast. There, in the center of the village, was the massive form of the 9 tails. Its dark, ominous figure towered over the buildings, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light as the beast roared once more, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations of Konoha. Can you feel what's happening? Itaki asked, and I shook my head. For the first time in my life, I couldn't feel anything around me. The only thing I could currently feel was the monster that had been unleashed upon the village, his presence drowning everything else. Chapter 25, Chapter 22, Danzo's Ambition. Screams. Blood. Panic. These were the only things running through the heart of Konoha. The Nine Tails, a massive beast of pure destruction, rampaged through Konoha without stopping. Buildings crumbled under the force of its tails, each swing sending debris and sometimes bodies flying. The ground shook with every step it took, the sheer weight of its chakra creating fissures in the earth. The tailed beast roared in anger, drowning out the screams of the citizens. People screamed and ran, trying to flee from the monstrous fox that seemed unstoppable. The once calm streets, filled with life, were now filled with cries of terror, corpses and the sounds of shattering wood and stone. Flames erupted from buildings struck by the beast, casting an eerie glow over the devastation. Those capable of fighting tried their best to defend their home, attempting to halt the advance of the Nine Tails. They unleashed their jutsus, hoping to slow the beast down. But their efforts were ultimately in vain. The fox's roar drowned out their battle cries, unleashing a devastating blast of chakra that obliterated everything in its path. All that was left was a cloud of smoke and a pair of crimson orbs shining through it, filled with nothing but hatred and rage. With each second the beast was free, more blood and bodies were added to the count, eating away at the hope of everyone around. In the distance, Takeshi watched in horror from relative safety. Even from afar, the sheer scale of the destruction was overwhelming. Anger, fear, and uncertainty swirled within him. How could he not feel this way? The village he'd known his entire life, his home was being torn apart, and all he could do was watch, hoping for the best. As civilians ran for their lives, faces masked with fear and desperation, and ninja scrambled to form defensive lines to protect their homes, their families, and their people, masked figures moved with cold precision throughout the destruction, ignoring the screams of the civilians and their fellow shinobi. Root operatives, shinobi indoctrinated to follow their orders without fail, trained to suppress all emotions and do only what their mission entailed, no matter the cost. Today, their mission wasn't helping the village deal with the Nine Tails. The lead operative of this mission, a woman with eyes as cold as ice named Uragi, observed the destruction with detached indifference as she moved through the destroyed streets of Konoha. Her mission was simple: eliminate 2 targets within the hour, using the Nine Tails attack as cover to avoid anything that happened today being tracked back to Root. Her first target was Arita Mai, age 29, mother of Arita Takeshi, wife of Arita Yoshiro, shinobi rank Jounin. The target was currently assisting civilians in their evacuation. Her lack of combat and field experience would make her an easy target. On the other side of the village, another operative, tall and imposing, named Raimano, under Uragi's command, closed in on the second target, Arita Yoshiro, age 35, father of Arita Takeshi, husband of Arita Mai, shinobi rank Jounin. The target was currently rescuing civilians and fellow shinobi from beneath the rubble and collapsed buildings, using his earth release to move debris. Unlike the first target, this one had a lot of field experience and could prove to be a problem if not handled properly. Caution was advised when dealing with him. Target confirmed. Uragi inquired in a monotone voice through their comms. The second operative, Raimano, replied as he unsheathed his blade. Arita Yoshiro. Confirmed. Uragi paused briefly before adding, Lord Danzo's orders were clear: we have to make it look like it was an accident under the Nine Tails. There's no room for mistakes. Understood, Raimano replied, his grip firm on the hilt of his blade. Once the mission is completed, rendezvous at the designated point. Affirmative, Uragi replied, cutting their communications. With mechanical precision, the operatives vanished into the ongoing chaos, each one going for their designated target, their figures merging with the shadows. Their mission was one of cold-blooded assassination, driven by the iron will of a leader who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals, even if it meant sacrificing his own people. Danzo's goal was simple: drive Takeshi into Root. Arita Mai, POV. Scared, I pushed through the chaos, helping everyone I could evacuate their homes as the Nine Tails continued its rampage through the village, praying that my son wasn't caught in the fire. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and the air was thick with smoke, blood, and fear. Every time the beast roared, my heart skipped a beat, but I couldn't afford to let my fear show. I had to keep moving, keep helping. I might be just a desk shinobi, as some would say, but I was still a shinobi of Konoha, and I would do my best to help my people. Stay together! I shouted, guiding a group of children toward the safety of one of the many safe houses around the village, places built exactly for this type of situation. Their faces were pale with terror, but they followed my lead, clutching at each other for support. Every moment I was out here, I worried about my son and husband. Takeshi had always been strong, smart, Too mature for his age, but he was still just a boy, my boy. And my husband. I could only hope he was safe. If anyone had to be okay, it was him. My man was strong and capable. I had to trust that they would be all right. As I turned to guide another family, an ANBU with a snake mask appeared in front of me, making me smile as relief washed over me. There were still many houses to evacuate, and there was only so much terrain I could cover. Thank goodness I began, but found myself unable to continue, as a sudden, overwhelming paralysis struck me. My limbs refused to obey me, my body frozen in place. Confusion soon turned into panic as I realized what was happening. I was trapped in a paralyzing genjutsu, an illusion cast by the one in front of me. The ANBU's eyes, visible through his mask, were cold and unfeeling. Release. I tried releasing the illusion, I tried screaming, but no sound escaped my lips. No matter how much I flared my chakra, I could only watch helplessly as the ANBU stepped back, his figure fading into the chaos. Realizing what this was an assassination, I struggled against the genjutsu with all my might, tears rolling down my face, but it was no use. My body remained rigid, my senses acutely aware of the danger around me. The ground shook violently as the nine tails roared again, and I saw the building next to me begin to crumble. Desperation filled me as the structure gave way, collapsing in slow motion. The roof caved in first, followed by the walls, a cascade of wood and stone, all coming my way. I wanted to move, to run, to do anything, but I was powerless. Time seemed to slow as the debris fell toward me. In those final moments, my thoughts were consumed by my family. Takeshi, my brave boy. My husband, always strong. I hoped they would be all right, that they would survive this nightmare. The last thing I saw was the building collapsing over me, burying me alive. The weight of the rubble pressed down, darkness enveloping me. And then, there was nothing. Chapter 26, Chapter 23, Danzo's Mistake. Arata Yoshiro, POV. This was not how I expected tonight to go. I thought I'd be sleeping beside my wife, maybe reading a book or two, but not this. Taking a deep breath, I moved through the village, helping to evacuate those who could not fend for themselves, be they civilians or injured shinobi. It had been years since I was in active duty, but my skills hadn't dulled enough to be useless in situations like this. As I moved, the nine tails raged on, tearing through everything in its path. Keep moving. You will receive medical attention at the safe zones, but keep moving. I yelled to a group of villagers, guiding them towards safety. The ground trembled with each step they took, the fear palpable. I could only hope my wife and child were okay. They were my everything, my sun and moon, my greatest treasure. Pushing those thoughts aside for now, I felt something at the back of my neck, a prickling sensation that set my nerves on edge. I glanced around, trying to pinpoint the source. Who's there? I called out, my voice cutting through the noise. Show yourself. I had no idea who was watching me. Enemy shinobi? Perhaps allies of the one who unleashed the nine tails? Before I could form any more theories, a figure stepped out from the shadows. An ANBU operative with a pig mask, his chakra devoid of emotion. The sight of him sent a wave of anger and disgust through me because I knew who this puppet worked for. Shimura Danzo. What do you want? I demanded, my eyes narrowing. I knew this didn't mean anything good for me. If Danzo's intentions were to help with the evacuation, his puppets would be helping. His puppets were good at one thing, and one thing only: blindly following orders. So the fact this soulless bastard wasn't helping meant he wasn't here to help. The emotionless bastard stood silent for a moment before drawing his blade and stepping closer. Yoshiro Arata, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. You are to be executed. So that was his mission, to kill me. I had no idea what I had done to get under Danzo's skin. I wasn't aware of his operations, I just knew he wasn't a man anyone should trust, and that was a sentiment most shinobi I knew shared. So I couldn't find a reason for this, unless I wasn't his real target but an obstacle for it. He wants my son. And if that's the case, he needs my Mygon too. I gritted my teeth, glaring at the bastard in front of me, knowing full well that by now, my sweet little flower was most likely dead. I won't let you lay a hand on my brat, fucker. Arata Takeshi has a duty to Konoha, the bastard said, his tone unyielding and unfeeling. My anger flared ever higher. And I told you, no. The bastard's gaze remained steady, unmoved by my words or rage. This is not a request. Fuck off, or I will kill you, I spat at him, getting ready to fight. The operative's eyes narrowed behind his mask. I'm afraid I can't do that, he said, his voice cold and final. He lunged at me with his blade, moving with the precision and speed expected of Danzo's minions. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. Years of training kicked in, muscle memory guiding my movements as I countered with a swift kick to the operative's side. The force of the blow sent him staggering back, but he quickly recovered, showing no signs of pain or discomfort. Fire style, flame bullets! I shouted, hurling a barrage of flaming projectiles toward the operative. The rapidity of my attack left him little room to dodge, and the flames consumed him in a bright, searing flash before his body exploded in a poof of smoke. A clone! Turning around, I ducked under his attack just in time, his blade a blur of deadly precision. Grabbing a kunai, I parried his following attack, our weapons clashing with a sharp metallic ring that echoed through the chaos around us. Every strike, every parry, was a desperate attempt to survive and protect my family. I couldn't let this battle drag on more than was absolutely necessary. One of the reasons I had retired was because my heart couldn't take the stress of combat, a side effect of a deadly poison I survived during one of my missions. If this continued, my heart would give out, and then Danzo would have an open path to my kid. I couldn't allow that to happen, I couldn't fail my son and my mai like that. Pushing forward, I managed to land a punch to his ribs, breaking one of them, but he retaliated with a swift kick that knocked me back. Pain flared through my side, but I pushed it aside, refusing to let this bastard have the upper hand. This is futile, the operative commented in a monotone tone, throwing a few shurikens my way. Tell Danzo he can suck my balls. He won't touch my kid, I growled, dodging the projectiles before lunging forward. I'll die before I let that happen. As if in response to my challenge, another figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, another operative with the same emotionless demeanor. This one wore a mask marked with the symbol of a snake. The sight of a second operative sent a chill down my spine. Fighting one was hard enough, but two? You were never meant to win, the first operative said coldly as the second joined the fray. I barely had time to react before they attacked in unison. Their movements were synchronized, each one complementing the other's strikes, making it nearly impossible to defend against both and attack at the same time. I parried a blow from the first, only to be met with a kick from the second that sent me staggering. Every time I tried to counter, one of them was there to block or retaliate. If they decided to start using jutsu, I was done for, which meant I was being lucky. No, that wasn't it. If their mission was to kill, and it was, why would they limit themselves when they could finish the job twice as fast with half the effort? Danzo's tools were a lot of things, but inefficient wasn't one of them. Which meant this had to be part of their mission. The question was, what could they possibly gain from holding themselves back during an assassination mission? If efficiency wasn't their goal, then what was it? And then it dawned on me, like a bucket of cold water. My death had to look natural, or as natural as possible in the current situation. My demise had to be marked as nothing more than collateral damage in the Nine Tails rampage, and in order to do so, they weren't aiming to kill but to exert my heart until it couldn't beat anymore. I gritted my teeth, dodging their combined attacks as I watched another two operatives appear. Running was out of the question, winning too. The only path I had was losing. I couldn't win before my heart gave out. Even now, I was already feeling my body begging to slow down. It wouldn't be long before things started to shut down, but I still had juice for one last thing, one last, fuck you. I might as well lose on my terms, making sure Danzo can't get what he wants. He can blow my dick in the afterlife. Summoning jutsu. My hands slammed onto the ground, chakras surging beneath my fingertips. Moments later, a puff of smoke engulfed me, obscuring my attacker's view as my summon, a large crane named Toru, appeared. We are supposed to be retired, Yoshiro, Toru groaned, the faint lines of weariness etched into his avian face. He shook his large, feathery head, silver eyes meeting mine. But I suppose retirement doesn't apply right now. Sorry for the bother, I chuckled, trying to regain my breath. But I need some help here. Toru cast me a wry glance, the corners of his beak curving upward in a semblance of a smile. He was as old and as grizzled as I was but still retained the fiery spirit of his youth. Of course, Yoshiro. We'll go out with a bang, won't we? That was part of the plan, but not all. I still needed to protect my son from Danzo, even if it meant doing it from the grave. Tora, I'm going to need one of your feathers, old friend, I said, plucking a feather out. The Crane summoning clan wasn't the strongest summoning clan out there when it came to fighting or tracking or stealth. However, there was one thing they did better than most summoning clans, and that was information delivery. Most shinobi usually ignored the Crane summons because of this reason, because field capabilities were limited compared to other summons. Which is why I know for a fact that what I'm about to do is something not even the bastard of Danzo or the third Hokage himself know. I will buy you some time, Tora grinned, already shifting his weight to prepare for the incoming assault. Make it quick, Yoshiro. These old wings don't move like they used to. In a few deft movements, my hands swiftly formed the series of seals needed, channeling some of my chakra into the feather. It glowed brightly for a moment before fading, now imbued with a message. I smiled, sending the feather back to the cranes. They would know what to do. I'm ready, old friend, I said, cracking my neck as I jumped back into the fray. Ready to go out with a bang. Always, Tora squawked back, his wings fanning open, building a gust of wind that sent leaves and debris scattering. You can take our lives, Danzo, leaving my son alone in this world, but one day, he will take your head. I have no doubt my child will be the strongest shinobi this world has ever seen. And by the time you come to regret your actions, the edge of his blade will already be upon you, you fucking bastard. Chapter 27, Chapter 24, You Can't Fool Me. 2 weeks later. Third-person POV. It had been 2 weeks since the Nine Tails attack, and the village of Konoha was still largely in ruins. The once bustling streets were now filled with debris and corpses, remnants of what had been homes, shops, and offices. Rebuilding efforts were underway, but the scars of that fateful night were deep and far-reaching. Despite Konoha's current state, a funeral for those who had fallen was being held. Takeshi stood among the gathered crowd, dressed in black clothes. He stared ahead, his expression distant and unreadable, as if he were looking at something that wasn't there, his eyes lost in the background. Itake, standing a few feet away with his own family, couldn't help but notice the emptiness in Takeshi's eyes. It was a stark contrast to the determined and focused demeanor he had known from his friend. Itake's gaze lingered on his friend, a sense of unease growing within him. Takeshi's usual spark was gone, replaced by a hollow look that seemed to pierce through everything around him. Itake couldn't help but blame himself a bit for this. If only he had been stronger, he could have maybe done something to help his friend, to save his family. The service continued, with speeches from the village elders and the Hokage, paying tribute to the brave souls who had given their lives to protect Konoha. Yet, through it all, Takeshi remained detached, his mind seemingly elsewhere. He barely registered the words spoken, the names read out loud, or the grief-stricken faces around him. Everyone around him was crying, but him. As the ceremony drew to a close, Itake found himself walking over to Takeshi. The crowd began to disperse, leaving the two boys standing together in silence. Itake studied Takeshi's face, searching for the right words. Takeshi, Itake began softly, trying to draw his attention. Are you all right? That was a stupid question, Itake knew that, but it was the only thing he could say. Takeshi blinked, as if coming out of a trance, and turned to face Itake. His eyes, though still distant, focused slightly on his friend. I'm fine, Itake, he replied, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. Just thinking, that's all. Itake fidgeted. It's okay to feel, you know. To grieve. You are allowed to cry. Takeshi nodded slowly, but his expression remained unchanged. I know, he said quietly. Thanks though. Itake placed a hand on Takeshi's shoulder, offering a silent gesture of support. He didn't press further, understanding that his friend needed time. The village might have been in ruins, but their bond remained strong. And Itake was determined to help Takeshi find his way back from this hole, no matter how long it took or what it took. As the funeral ended and the crowd began to disperse, Takeshi made his way towards the exit, his steps slow and heavy after his talk with Itake. The weight of the day pressed down on him, mingling with the profound sense of loss he felt. He barely registered the murmured condolences and sympathetic looks from the villagers around him. As he reached the outskirts of the gathering, an elderly figure stepped into his path. Shimura Danzo, his face a mask of solemnity, approached Takeshi with an air of benevolence. His presence was almost paternal, a stark contrast to the sinister reputation he held among those who knew the darker side of Konoha's politics. Takeshi, Danzo greeted, his voice gentle and warm. I wanted to offer my condolences for your loss. Your parents were exceptional shinobi. Some would even call them heroes, and how could they not? They died protecting this village, without hesitation or remorse. Takeshi looked up at Danzo, his eyes still hollow, before forcing a faint smile, a practiced gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for your kind words, Lord Danzo, he replied, his voice polite but distant. Danzo's eyes narrowed slightly, a calculating gleam hidden behind his kind facade. They were heroes, Takeshi, don't ever forget that. Their sacrifice will be remembered by all. If you ever need anything, know that my door is always open to you. Takeshi nodded, the empty smile still on his lips. I appreciate that, he said, his tone respectful. But if you'll excuse me, I need some time alone. Danzo stepped aside, allowing Takeshi to pass. Of course, my boy. Take all the time you need. And remember, the village is here for you. As Takeshi walked away, he felt Danzo's gaze on his back, a lingering presence that sent a shiver down his spine. He didn't trust the old man, but he couldn't afford to show any weakness. Not now, not ever. Root. Later that night, in the dimly lit confines of one of Root's secret bases, Danzo Shimura sat alone in his private chamber. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of quiet contemplation. He stared at the flame, his mind wandering back to the events of the day. It was such a shame, but it was necessary. They would have gotten in my way, he murmured to himself, his voice a low rasp in the silent room. Necessary to have them out of the picture. Yoshiro and Mayarita were too strong, too devoted to the village and their son. Their presence would have hindered my plans. Danzo leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he recalled his encounter with Takeshi at the funeral earlier this morning. The boy's faint smile, the empty look in his eyes, it was as if he was staring into the void, disconnected from the world around him. It was a sight that pleased Danzo more than he cared to admit. Takeshi, he whispered, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and anticipation. A genius in the making. His parents' deaths have left him vulnerable, a state of mind I can use to mold him into the perfect weapon. He closed his eyes, envisioning the potential that lay within Takeshi. The boy had already shown remarkable skill and determination. Without any formal training, he had managed to kill one of his operatives. With the right guidance and training, he could become one of Root's most formidable assets, no, one of Konoha's greatest weapons. If he trained him well, Takeshi could become his successor for when he becomes the Hokage, a deadly shadow to protect Konoha and himself. It won't be long now, Danzo continued, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Today, he showed me a glimpse of what he can become. That faint, empty smile, it held nothing at all. It was as if he had already begun to detach himself from the emotions that make people weak. Just a little more and he will be ready. He tapped his fingers on the armrest of his chair, his mind working through the next steps of his plan. Root needed someone like Takeshi, someone with the potential to rise above the ordinary and become an extraordinary force. His operatives were useful, but none held the potential Takeshi held. Taking him now would ensure Takeshi was loyal to the village, Root, and most importantly, to himself. Patience, he reminded himself. It is only a matter of time. Soon, the child will be ready to see that the path I offer is the only one that can give his life meaning. He will come to understand that the village's protection requires sacrifices, and he will embrace the role I have planned for him. All he had to do was wait for Hiruzen to lower his guard once more, and the rest would follow on its own. Danzo's smile widened, a cold and calculated expression. He will be mine to shape and mold. And when the time comes, he will be the weapon that ensures Konoha's dominance in this unforgiving world. With that thought, Danzo extinguished the candle, plunging the room into darkness. He sat there, surrounded by shadows, his mind already plotting the next moves in his intricate game. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, Takeshi would be the key to unlocking the future Danzo envisioned for the village. Uchiha Compound. Main House. In the quiet of their home, Mikoto and Fugaku Uchiha sat facing each other, the weight of recent events still pressing heavily on their minds. Mikoto's eyes were filled with concern as she looked at her husband, her voice tinged with urgency. "We need to talk about Takeshi," she began, her tone serious. "We need to help him. He's been through so much, and now he has no one. We owe it to his family to protect him." Fugaku nodded, his expression uncharacteristically soft. I know, Mikoto. The boy has lost both his parents in the attack, and he's been left vulnerable. If he's left alone, the vultures will come raining on him. Mikoto sighed, her gaze dropping to her hands clasped in her lap. One already did. Shimura Danzo approached him after the funeral. It was subtle, but I could see the interest in his eyes. Nothing good ever comes from that man, Fugaku. If he gets his claws into Takeshi, I fear what might happen to the boy, I fear what he will turn him into. Fugaku's jaw tightened at the mention of Danzo. Nothing good will come out of that. Danzo's methods are ruthless, and his intentions are always shrouded in secrecy. He uses people as pawns for his own ends. Takeshi would be no different. Mikoto reached out, placing a hand on Fugaku's arm. We could take legal custody of him. That way, Takeshi would be under the protection of our clan. We can give him a stable home, protect him from Danzo's influence, and ensure that he grows up in a loving environment. Itaka has already grown close to him, he loves him like a brother, and having him here would be good for both of them. Fugaku considered her words carefully, his eyes meeting hers with a determined look. You're right. However, we can't fully adopt him without creating some problems within the clan council. That said, we can still have someone else within the clan, someone of confidence, take the legal aspect of this. We owe it to the Arita family to look after Takeshi. Mikoto's eyes softened with relief. Thank you. Fugaku nodded, his resolve firm. I'll handle the legalities. We'll make sure everything is in order. I already have the person in mind for the job, Torin Uchiha. That's Shisui's father, right? Mikoto nodded, a hint of relief evident in her features. Fugaku affirmed with a curt nod, his mind already racing through the necessary steps they would need to take to secure Takeshi's safety. Yes, Torin is well respected within the clan and has a strong sense of justice. But most importantly, he's loyal and will do as I ask. Chapter 28, Chapter 25, Borrowed Time. Arita Takeshi, POV. I watched as everything I had ever known was destroyed. I watched as people I knew, as innocents, were killed. I watched everything I cared about was taken from me, and I couldn't do a thing to stop it. I couldn't help with the 9 tails, so I couldn't help save Minato or Kushina. That night, there was no difference between me and the next civilian because, at the end of the day, I had been able to do just as much as them nothing. I couldn't help my parents as they were being killed by shinobi from our own village, so they died. I couldn't even feel them as they died because the 9 tails chakra was so abrasive, so massive, so overwhelmingly powerful that it had overwhelmed my senses, making it impossible for me to feel anything but that damn beast. For all the talent and powers I supposedly had, I was more than helpless when I most needed to be strong. I was no better than a fallen leaf, torn from a tree, destined to drift aimlessly on the merciless currents of wind until it was torn apart. The only reason I had even found out they were killed by our own people was because one of my father's summons had delivered the message. Otherwise, I would have probably believed the lies they told about them at their funeral, saying they died saving others from the tailed beast. It had taken every fiber of my being to not attack Danzo that very same day when he approached me. Then again, I guess it hadn't been so hard. I was so numb with rage that I barely felt a thing as I talked to him. I didn't know that was possible, feeling so much of something that you end up feeling nothing at all. I was weak. I didn't care if my age justified my level of strength. I didn't care if I was a monster for my age. I was weak. I refused to remain like this. I would become stronger, no. I would become the strongest. I had to. I had to become a shinobi without equal. Not that this goal wasn't any different than the one I had before. So, I suppose the only difference was that now, I wanted to do something once I reached that peak I was after. I wanted to destroy everything Danzo has ever built. His reign, his influence, his life, it would all come to a bitter and brutal end by my Claymore. But not before he was forced to feel what I had felt today. Not before he was stripped of everything he holds dear, just like I was. I would ensure his spirit and mind crumbled to ashes before dealing the final blow. My, you sure are feeling a lot of hate right now, Teresa said, materializing beside me as a silhouette before solidifying into her usual elegant form, interrupting my train of thought. Wouldn't you? I retorted, a hint of acidic bitterness lacing my words behind my seemingly calm face. Can't say I ever felt hate in my life as a warrior, mostly boredom, then happiness during my time with Claire, Teresa shrugged, her silver eyes staring at me. But now that I think about it, if the organization had killed Claire, I think I would have felt just like you. That being said, it would do you well to remember what happens when claymores like us let emotions, like hate, fester in our hearts. If you're concerned about me ending like Priscilla, don't be, I replied, my gaze meeting hers. I just want justice. Maybe my idea of justice was a lot closer to what someone would call revenge, but I wasn't a blind idiot that would let his hate consume him. I hated the guy, with all my heart, sure, and for that, I would kill him and everything he stands for. But that was it. My hatred and thirst for blood start and end with him. Teresa tilted her head, a soft sigh escaping her lips. That's a thin line you're trying to walk, Takeshi, one that I would love to help you navigate. Really? For a moment there, I had the feeling you were against it, I replied with an arched brow, casting a sidelong glance at Teresa. Against it? Hardly, Teresa quipped, returning my look with a soft laugh. I don't even care if you end up killing everyone in this village. As long as you don't let yourself awaken, I will support your choices, no matter how homicidal or morally dubious they are. My only concern is these emotions leading to your awakening. After all, I can't have my one and only student become an abyssal one. I have a reputation to uphold. Besides, it's hardly necessary to kill the old man. I suppose I don't care what her reasons for supporting me are, because at the end of the day, as long as she trains me, she can do or think whatever she wants about my motives and actions. I wasn't planning on it. I still have a lot of people I care about in the village. I care a lot about this place in general. It's my home. It's just that man I want to cut down. I didn't know much about Danzo, but I knew enough to know he was a cancer, a tumor that needed to be cut out, excised from the heart of Konoha. He had weaved his vile, insidious influence around our village for far too long. It was time to sever those tendrils and restore the health of our home. Teresa's silver eyes studied me, flickering with an unreadable emotion. Well, in that case, Takeshi, she began, her tone hinting at a strange mix of amusement and solemnity, I guess I will have to up your training. Third-person POV. Takeshi's room. That night, Takeshi lay in his bed, in the remnants of his home, the room dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the window. Tsuki, the other survivor of his family, curled up beside him, purring softly. He ran his fingers through her soft fur, finding a small measure of comfort in her presence. The events of the day weighed heavily on his mind, the memories of the funeral and the conversation with Danzo playing over and over again. As he continued to pet his cat, his parents' last gift to him, silent tears began to flow down his cheeks, unnoticed even by himself. Before he realized it, he was drifting, caught in the gentle push and pull of sleep. His eyes fluttered shut, his hand stilled against Tsuki's warm fur as the room quieted, leaving only the sound of Tsuki's rhythmic purring. I have quite the knack for getting attached to problematic kids, Teresa murmured, a faint smile on her face as she watched Takeshi from a corner of the room. Then again, maybe I'm the problematic one, who knows? Chapter 29, Chapter 26, Will of Fire. Arita Takeshi, POV. 2 months had passed since the Nine Tails incident. The scars of that terrible night were still visible throughout Konoha, with many parts of the village still in ruins. My house, thankfully, hadn't suffered as much damage as other houses around my neighborhood had. There were still things to fix, but nothing that needed immediate attention. Calmly, I moved through the rooms, broom in hand, sweeping away the dust and debris that had accumulated. Tsuki followed me, her soft purrs and gentle presence a constant comfort. Tsuki hadn't separated from me since that night. Perhaps she sensed my solitude and was attempting to soothe it in her own feline way. As I moved, my eyes wandered over the cracked walls. I might need to hire someone to fix that, though I doubt I will find someone available right now, or for the next few months, considering how much work the village needs. Turning around, I paused for a moment, glancing at the photo of my parents that sat on a nearby broken table. The sight of their smiling faces brought a pang of sadness and anger, but I quickly pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. There was no time for dwelling on the past, I had to keep moving forward. I would kill Danzo eventually, but until then, I wouldn't let him control my every action. There was much to be done before killing him. As I continued cleaning, the sound of the door sliding open caught my attention. I turned to see Ataka standing in the doorway, his expression as calm and composed as ever. Takeshi, he greeted, stepping inside. Have you already bought the materials for the academy? I nodded, setting the broom aside. Yes, I got everything yesterday. Itaka gave a small nod of approval. Good. The academy starts in a week, so it's important to be prepared. Admit it, you just don't want to go without me, I replied, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Guilty, he admitted, a rare grin gracing his face. It wouldn't be the same without my best friend. Well, it's no fun when he reacts like that to my teasing. Suki, seeming to have an opinion on our conversation, meowed, rubbing against my leg as if saying, pay attention to me, not him. Smiling, I bent down to pick her up, stroking her soft fur as she settled comfortably in my arms. Itaka's gaze softened as he looked at the cat. Suki seems to be doing well. She's been my little shadow, I said with a chuckle, kissing the forehead of my purring cat. Always following me around. Are you sure you don't want to stay with us for a while? Itaka asked, his gaze thoughtful as he looked around my house. At least until your house is fixed up. I shook my head slightly, a small smile playing on my lips. I appreciate the offer, Itaka, but you know my answer. This wasn't the first time he had offered for me to stay with his family. I knew they were worried about my mental state, about how being here was affecting me, and I really appreciated the feeling behind their concerns, but I still had some things to work through, things that I needed to process alone. Maybe one day I would take the offer, but right now, I felt like I needed to be here. At least until I fixed my home, after that, who knows? Very well, Itaka conceded, his tone heavy with resignation. He paused, glancing at the fading sunset through the wooden slats of the window. Just promise me you won't overwork yourself, Takeshi. I offered him a faint smile. Talking about the academy, how long do you think it will take before we get bored? Itaka's lips quirked up in a small smile. Probably not long, a few months, maybe. His eyes held a hint of amusement in them. Just remember to behave yourself and not cause any unnecessary trouble, my mother will scold you if you do. Me, causing trouble? I said, feigning surprise as I placed a hand over my heart in a dramatic manner. I would never do such a thing, especially with the threat of Lady Mikoto on the line. Itaka chuckled. Yes, none of us would dare cross paths with her. Well, if you're gonna be standing there you might as well help, I said, motioning towards the pile of trash in the corner, before pointing to one of the brooms I had lying around. Unless you're afraid of breaking a nail or something. Itaka nodded, walking over to the pile and picking up a broom. You're just jealous because I have better nails than you, he retorted. The Hokage Tower. Third-person POV. Mikoto and Fugaku Uchiha made their way to the Hokage's office, their expressions serious and determined. The weight of the request they were about to make hung heavily between them, each step bringing them closer to the inevitable confrontation. As they entered the office, they were greeted by the Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, who sat behind his desk with a calm and attentive demeanor. Beside him stood Danzo Shimura, his presence as cold as ever. The tension in the room was palpable. Lord Hokage, Fugaku began, bowing respectfully. We have come to discuss the matter of Takeshi Arita. Hiruzen nodded, gesturing for them to sit. Please, have a seat. What is it that you wish to discuss? Mikoto spoke up, her voice steady but filled with a mother's concern. I will cut to the chase, Lord Hokage. We would like to request that Takeshi be placed under our care. He has lost his parents, and we believe it would be best for him to be with a family who can provide the support and guidance he needs. Takeshi's mom was my friend, and I've been around his life for a long time. I believe we are the right call for this job. Danzo's eye narrowed slightly, his tone measured but firm. While your intentions may be noble, Mikoto, it is crucial to consider the larger picture. Takeshi Arita possesses a unique set of abilities that could be of great benefit to Konoha. It would be unwise to place him under the care of a single clan, especially one as politically significant as the Uchiha. Fugaku's expression remained composed, though a flicker of irritation and anger crossed his features. With all due respect, Danzo, Takeshi's welfare should be the primary concern. He has just lost his parents, and the last thing he needs is to be thrust into a world of politics and power struggles. Danzo's gaze remained unwavering. It is precisely because of his abilities that we must ensure he is properly guided. The village can provide him with the training and discipline necessary to harness his potential for the greater good of Konoha. Mikoto's eyes flashed with anger as she glared at the elder. Takeshi is not a tool to be used, Lord Shimura. He is a child who needs a family. The Uchiha can provide him with a loving environment and the support he needs to grow and heal. Danzo's tone grew colder, his eye narrowing. Emotional support is one thing, but what of his training? His potential must be cultivated carefully, and the Uchiha are not known for their willingness to share power or knowledge. Fugaku's voice hardened. This is not about power or knowledge, Danzo. This is about a child's well-being. Takeshi needs stability, not to be treated like a pawn in some grand scheme. Danzo's lips curled into a thin smile, devoid of warmth. And who better to ensure his stability than the village itself? The Uchiha have their own interests, and it would be naive to think that you would not seek to use Takeshi for your own purposes. Mikoto took a step forward, almost hissing her words out. Our only interest is in his well-being. The Uchiha have no interest in using him. Takeshi has already suffered enough. He deserves a chance to be a child, not a soldier. The room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with unspoken accusations and mistrust. Hiruzen watched the exchange carefully, his eyes flicking between the two sides. Finally, he raised a hand to silence the brewing argument. Enough, Hiruzen said, his tone brooking no argument. Both of you have valid points. However, we must consider what is best for Takeshi in the long term. He turned his gaze to Danzo. While your concerns about his abilities are noted, seeing we don't know how much his Kekii Genkai can do, it is crucial that he is placed in an environment where he can find stability and emotional support. For now, I believe it is best that he stays with the Uchiha. Danzo's eyes hardened, clearly displeased with the decision. Hiruzen, this is a matter of the village's safety we're discussing. His abilities. I understand your concern, Danzo, Hiruzen cut him off, an edge to his voice. But this decision isn't yours to make. We don't want to repeat the Hotaki situation. Does that mean the clan has your permission to take legal responsibility for Takeshi? Mikoto asked. Hiruzen nodded. Mikoto, you will take responsibility for Takeshi's care. Ensure that he is provided with everything he needs. This decision is final. Danzo's voice was icy, his displeasure barely concealed. One day you will come to regret this decision, Sarutobi. The boy's potential is too great to be left in the hands of a single clan. We must think of the village as a whole. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone unyielding. And I am. The boy's well-being comes first because through it, the village will be benefited. He will be placed with the Uchiha, and they will be responsible for his care and training. This discussion is over. Mikoto bowed her head respectfully. Thank you, Lord Hokage. We will do our best to care for him. Fugaku nodded in agreement, his expression one of determination and relief. We will protect him and guide him, Lord Hokage. With the matter settled, Hiruzen dismissed them, and Mikoto and Fugaku left the office, leaving Danzo standing there, his displeasure evident. As they walked away, Fugaku couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, knowing that Danzo would not give up so easily. Chapter 30, Chapter 27, The Academy, is boring. Hokage Office. Third-person POV. As the door closed behind Mikoto and Fugaku, the tension in the room remained palpable. Hiruzen Sarutobi turned his attention to Danzo, who stood there with a grim expression, his displeasure evident. Danzo, Hiruzen began, his tone measured but firm, why are you so adamant about Takeshi not staying with the Uchiha? Danzo's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice cold and unyielding. Hiruzen, you are being a blind fool, as usual. Takeshi is not just any child, he is a valuable tool for Konoha. Allowing him to stay with the Uchiha, a clan already under suspicion for the Nine Tails attack, is a grave mistake. Hiruzen's gaze hardened, his voice low and controlled. Are you suggesting that the Uchiha are responsible for the Nine Tails incident? Even after Minato himself confirmed Takeshi's warnings about the intruder not being from the village. Danzo's lips thinned into a tight line. I am suggesting that we cannot afford to be complacent. The Uchiha have always been a clan that seeks power. Placing Takeshi in their care only strengthens their position. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Danzo's. Takeshi is a child who has just lost his parents. And Fugaku and his family are the only thing he has left. He needs stability and support, not to be treated as a mere tool. The Uchiha can provide that stability. Danzo's voice grew harsher, almost growling. And what if they use him against us? What if they mold him into a weapon for their own purposes? You are too trusting, Hiruzen. The village's safety must come first, no matter what. Hiruzen's expression remained calm, but his eyes flashed with a steely resolve. And what of Takeshi's well-being, Danzo? All your points are that we are losing a valuable tool, but not about Takeshi himself. Are we to sacrifice his childhood for the sake of potential threats? We cannot allow ourselves to be ruled by fear and suspicion. Danzo's fists clenched at his sides, his voice dripping with disdain. You are too soft, Hiruzen. Your idealism blinds you to the harsh realities of the world. We must be vigilant. We must be prepared to do whatever it takes to protect Konoha. Hiruzen stood, his presence commanding as he faced Danzo. And I will not allow us to lose our humanity in the process. Takeshi will stay with the Uchiha, and they will care for him. We will monitor the situation closely, but we will not turn an innocent child into a pawn in our political games. Danzo's eyes flashed with anger, but he knew better than to challenge Hiruzen directly in this setting. Instead, he nodded curtly, his expression hardening. As you wish, Lord Hokage. But do not say I didn't warn you. Hiruzen's gaze softened slightly, though his resolve remained firm. Your concerns are noted, Danzo. But remember, we are here to protect all of Konoha's citizens, including its children. We must strive to find a balance between security and compassion. Danzo's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. And what if your compassion leads to our downfall? The Uchiha have already shown they cannot be trusted. How long until they turn against us with Takeshi as their weapon? Hiruzen's eyes blazed with fierce determination. We will deal with that if and when it comes. For now, Takeshi is a child in need of a home and family. I will not deny him that because of your paranoia. Danzo's expression darkened, his hands gripping his cane tightly. Paranoia, you say? It was my paranoia that kept this village safe during the Third Shinobi War. It was my paranoia that uncovered countless threats before they could strike. And it will be my paranoia that ensures Konoha's survival. Hiruzen took a step forward, flaring his chakra, making Danzo take a step back. At what cost, Danzo? How many lives have been sacrificed in the name of your protection? How many innocents have we put through hell for it? How many more are you willing to sacrifice? I will not let you turn this village into a place ruled by fear and suspicion. Danzo's eyes bore into Hiruzen's, his voice a low growl. And I will not let your sentimentality lead us to ruin. Remember this day, Hiruzen. Remember it when the Uchiha turn on us and Takeshi is their weapon. Hiruzen's voice was cold as ice. I will remember, Danzo. But I will also remember that I chose to protect a child and give him a chance at a normal life. That is something you seem to have forgotten in your eternal pursuit of power. Danzo turned sharply on his heel, his cloak billowing behind him as he strode towards the door. This isn't over, Hiruzen. Not by a long shot. Yes, it is, Danzo, Hiruzen replied, his tone colder than anyone would expect from the kind Hokage. Don't test the limits of my patience by meddling in this matter. Because I assure you, that I won't stand back and watch. As the door slammed shut behind Danzo, Hiruzen let out a weary sigh, sinking back into his chair. The weight of the village's future pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew he had made the right choice. Arata Takeshi, POV. 1 week later. The sun rose over Konoha, casting a warm, golden glow on the village as it began to stir to life. Today was a special day for many children, including me, as it marked the beginning of our journey as ninja at the academy. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting my jacket, wondering how much I would learn at the academy today. I had pretty high standards when it came to learning. My clothes were neatly pressed, and Tsuki, my loyal cat, circled my feet, seemingly sensing my anticipation. Ready for the big day, Tsuki? I asked, bending down to scratch her behind the ears. She purred in response, nuzzling my hand. After one last glance in the mirror, I grabbed my backpack and headed out the door, eager to meet Itaki and start learning. The academy buzzed with energy as parents and children filled the courtyard. I spotted Itaki standing with Mikoto and Fugaku, who were bidding him farewell. Mikoto waved at me, a warm smile on her face. Good luck today, Takeshi, Mikoto said as I approached. Fugaku gave me a nod of acknowledgement. I made some lunch for you. Thanks, Lady Mikoto, I replied, taking the bento box she was offering. Itaki turned to me. Ready for our first day? Definitely, I smiled. We walked into the academy together, joining a throng of other children who were chattering excitedly. That might get annoying soon. As we entered the classroom, our teacher greeted us with a warm smile. Welcome, everyone. I'm Yoshida Hagamoto, and I'll be your instructor this year, he announced, his voice carrying over the excited chatter. We're going to start with some introductions, and then we'll have a little test to see where everyone stands. Itaki and I exchanged glances, our curiosity piqued. A test was a good way to start the day, especially if it was a hard test. Calmly, we took our seats, sitting at the back, waiting for the introductions to begin. One by one, the children stood up and introduced themselves. I noticed a variety of personalities, some confident, others shy, but all eager to begin their ninja training. I also noticed most glared at Itaki when he introduced himself, rude. Takeshi, your turn, Mr. Hagamoto eventually called, breaking my train of thought. Nodding, I stood up and faced the class. My name is Arita Takeshi, and that's all you guys need to know about me, I introduced, my voice steady, a faint smile on my face. My goals, dreams, likes, and dislikes are none of your concern, so please ignore me, for I will do the same to all you. Okay. Mr. Hagamoto said, raising an eyebrow slightly as I sat back down but moved swiftly along. And now they are glaring at me? Rude. After the introductions were over, Mr. Hagamoto clapped his hands. All right, everyone, now it's time for our placement test. This will help us understand what you already know and where we need to focus. Finally, time to learn something, time to become stronger. Mr. Hagamoto handed out the test papers, and I glanced at the questions. My excitement quickly turned to disbelief, and that disbelief quickly turned into utter disappointment. Question 1, how many kunao are in the picture? Question 2, what is the name of our village? Question 3, draw the symbol of Konoha. Question 4, what are the 3 basic types of jutsu? Question 5, name all of the Hokage. Question 6, what is chakra? Question 7, what is the difference between a kunao and a shuriken? Question 8, name 2 clans in the village. Question 9, was Senju Tobirama the first Hokage? Yes or no? I stared at the paper, then looked at Itaki, who was equally baffled and disappointed as I was. The questions were ridiculously easy, almost laughably so. This was below even my lowest expectations, and boy, my expectations for this were low. I feel we are a bit overqualified, Itaki whispered to me, and I could only nod in agreement. Thinking this had to be some kind of joke, I glanced around the room. Many of our classmates were furrowing their brows in concentration, some even biting their pencils in frustration. I couldn't believe it. Well, shit, it wasn't some kind of joke. I think hanging out with Itaki has made me forget how mentally challenged normal kids are. Sighing, I grabbed my pen, and in 10 seconds, finished the entire test. I'm done, I said, turning to Itaki. Same, Itaki replied, his tone deadpan. Should we give the tests back to the teacher? Or do you think there will be a second phase? What? The head, shoulders, knees, and toes phase. I replied. Another phase, as if. Nothing as disappointing as this poor excuse of a test can have a second phase. No sharing answers, Mr. Hagamoto interrupted our whispering, coming over to lightly rap a ruler against our desks. I will assume that was a joke, I replied, handing my test back to Mr. Hagamoto. I'm done as well, Itaki said, handing his test as well. Very well, Mr. Hagamoto replied, a hint of surprise as he took the papers from us, glancing over the answers quickly, his eyes widening slightly. The test was supposed to keep the class busy for an hour. Can we read? Itaki asked, and the teacher nodded absent-mindedly. I sighed. I had the feeling this was the start of a very boring chain of events. Chapter 31, Chapter 28, Decorating. Arita Takeshi, POV. In the quiet depths of the forest to the north of Konoha, I moved through the trees, swinging my claymore in a wide arc. The blade cut through the air with a satisfying whoosh. Since the utter disappointment of the academy, this part of the forest had become my sanctuary, a place where I could train without distractions or interruptions, a place where I could actually learn something instead of sitting all day, counting the seconds to go home. The academy was boring, to say the least. It was far too easy, nothing but a waste of time. Unfortunately, it was one of those things you needed to do, regardless of how useless it was, in order to advance up the ladder. So, instead of just not going, I sent a shadow clone to attend in my place. That way, I would still graduate from the academy and learn something at the same time. A two birds, one stone kind of situation. Focus, Takeshi, Teresa commented, looking at me. Your form is improving, but you need to work on your footwork. It's the foundation of your technique. I nodded, adjusting my stance and concentrating on the movement of my feet. Using a claymore, or any sword for that matter, required two things, power and speed, but also impeccable footwork. If I stumbled, even slightly, it could mean the difference between victory and defeat. As I moved through the forms she had taught me in these past few days, creating after-images with my rapid movements due to the constant use of the phantom mirage, I began to wonder how long it would take me to reach a level of strength where eliminating Danzo became an achievable goal rather than a distant dream. As I swung my claymore in a precise arc, fantasizing about killing an elderly veteran, finding myself completely lost in the rhythm of my training, I heard the soft rustle of leaves, followed by the unmistakable presence of someone approaching. I paused, glancing towards the source of the sound, as Itaki emerged from the shadows of the trees, his arms crossed and an amused expression on his face. "Skipping school, are we?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged, lowering my weapon. "You know why? It's boring and easy. There's no point in going when I can learn more out here." I smirked. "Besides, you shouldn't be saying anything. Aren't you skipping too?" Itaki's lips twitched into a small smile. "True, I did send a shadow clone to the academy." He uncrossed his arms and took a step closer. "But you should have told me you were planning to skip. We could have skipped together. I thought we were friends." "I'm hurt." I chuckled, tilting my head. "I didn't think you'd be interested. You follow the rules to the letter." "Well, even a disciplined shinobi needs a break every now and then." Itaki moved closer. "So what are we doing today, Takeshi?" I slanted a look at him, the corners of my lips tugging upward. "Improving my kenjutsu. You can do whatever you want." Itaki gave a nod of approval, lowering himself onto the ground cross-legged. "Then I suppose I'll train my shurikenjutsu." At the academy, Takeshi's clone trudged down the hall, heading towards the bathroom to clean his hands. The boredom of today's class was so massive he almost popped from the sheer monotony and lack of stimuli of the day. "Curse the original," he muttered under his breath as he walked. "Sending me here to suffer while he gets to train. Cruel, that's what it is. I know we clones are basically slaves, but this is inhumane." As he pushed the bathroom door open, several pairs of hands grabbed him, shoving him against the wall. Well, look who finally showed up," Saiso Kamano, the wannabe bully of the academy, sneered, flanked by his cronies. "Time you learn some respect, Takeshi." The clone sighed inwardly. This was the last thing he needed. "You don't want to do this, it won't end well for you. Then again, it might just amuse me, making today worth it." Saiso's face twisted with anger. "Shut up. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? You think because you hang out with that Uchiha that you can look down on us?" "Oh no, it has nothing to do with Itaki," the clone replied, deadpan. "I just think none of you deserve the attention, that's all." One of Saiso's friends stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Let's teach him a lesson, boss." God, the clone could only cringe at the scene. This was beyond cliché. The moment Saiso and his friends moved to attack, the clone sprang into action. With swift, calculated movements, he dodged their blows, redirecting their momentum against them. Within moments, the bathroom became a chaotic mess of flailing limbs and panicked yells. "You guys should really pay attention in taijutsu class," the clone muttered as he maneuvered them into compromising positions. "This is just sad." "Fuck you!" Saiso hissed, throwing a punch at the clone. The clone smiled, shaking his head in faint disappointment as he grabbed Saiso's wrist, twisting it behind his back, and with a swift motion, shoved his head into the nearest toilet bowl. "You need a good wash," the clone quipped. "Saying bad words is bad, that's a no-no." One of Saiso's cronies lunged at him, but the clone sidestepped, causing the boy to trip over his own feet and land face first into another toilet bowl. "Oops, watch your step," the clone said with a faint smile. The last of Saiso's friends hesitated, looking between his incapacitated comrades and the clone. The clone raised an eyebrow. "You want some too?" he asked. The boy shook his head frantically, backing away. "And no, I'm good." And just like that, you are the smartest of your group, the clone said, patting him on the shoulder before calmly leaving the bathroom. Maybe the academy wasn't such a bad place for a clone to have some fun in their short life. Uchiha compound, main house. Mikoto hummed softly to herself as she moved about the room, placing finishing touches on the decorations. The room was bright and welcoming, with a fresh coat of paint and new furniture arranged carefully. She had spent the last few days preparing it, wanting everything to be perfect. The walls were a soothing shade of blue, chosen to bring a sense of calm and comfort. She placed a few framed photos on the dresser, smiling at the memories they held. One picture showed a younger Itaki, beaming with pride as he held his first kunao. Another captured a rare moment of Fugaku smiling warmly at his family during a picnic. A soft rug covered the floor, and the bed was neatly made with fresh linens. It was a room filled with warmth and care, a stark contrast to the emptiness Takeshi must have felt in his own home. On the desk, Mikoto had arranged a few school supplies, neatly stacked notebooks, and a new set of writing tools. She even added a small bookshelf with some of her favorite childhood books, hoping to spark a similar love for reading in Takeshi. A comfortable chair was placed by the window, perfect for sitting and enjoying the view of the garden below. Fugaku entered the room, watching his wife with a thoughtful expression. "You're really going all out, aren't you?" he remarked, leaning against the door frame. Mikoto turned to him, a warm smile on her face. "Of course. I want him to feel at home here. He deserves a place where he feels safe and loved." Fugaku nodded, stepping further into the room. The Hokage's permission was worded carefully. "The clan elders believe that Takeshi has been given to us as a ward, because none else but the Uchihas could bring him to his full potential. This means there hasn't been any significant political backlash, at least not yet. In other words, they didn't need to put Takeshi under the care of another." Mikoto's smile faded slightly as she considered the implications. "Do you think there will be trouble later on?" "Perhaps," Fugaku admitted, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "But for now, we have the Hokage's support. As long as we present this as an act of protection and political importance, the elders won't have much ground to stand on." Mikoto sighed softly, leaning into his touch. "I just want him to be happy, Fugaku. He's been through so much already." Fugaku's gaze softened as he looked at his wife. "I know. And we'll do everything we can to make sure he feels like part of our family." Mikoto nodded, a sad smile on her face. "Thank you, Fugaku. Your support means everything to me." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "We're in this together, Mikoto. Takeshi will have a home here, with us." Mikoto smiled again, her heart swelling with hope. She turned back to the room, adding a few final touches. She placed a small potted plant on the windowsill, a vibrant green fern that added a touch of life to the room. Next to it, she placed a small picture frame that held a family photo taken during a festival, everyone dressed in traditional attire, smiling brightly at the camera, a photo she had taken of Mai and Toshiro last summer. "I hope he likes it," she murmured, arranging a few decorative cushions on the bed. "He will," he assured her. "You've done a wonderful job." Mikoto glanced at the room, her eyes lingering on the details. Her mind wandering between Takeshi and Danzo, things were never simple. Mikoto's smile faltered slightly as she turned to him, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Fugaku, I've been thinking about Naruto," she began softly, her voice tinged with concern. "He's just a newborn, and with Kushina and Minato gone. Is there truly nothing we can do?" Fugaku's expression darkened slightly, and he sighed deeply. "I understand your sentiments, Mikoto. But taking, or rather trying to take Naruto in would put our clan in great danger. His status as a Jinchuriki would put us under the eyes of the village. Not only that, there's already a lot of suspicion surrounding the Uchiha clan after the Nine Tails attack." Mikoto nodded. "I know, but it just feels wrong to leave him alone. He's just a baby. He needs a family." Fugaku reached out, taking her hands in his. "I know. But there's nothing we can do without hurting the Uchiha as a whole. The third Hokage has arranged for him to be cared for. While it may not be the same as having a family, it is the safest option for him and for our clan. The village needs to heal, and the suspicion surrounding the Nine Tails needs to settle. Trying to add Naruto to our household would only escalate the tensions." Mikoto looked down, her heart heavy with the weight of their reality. "I just wanted to do right by Kushina," she whispered, her voice filled with sadness. Fugako lifted her chin gently, looking into her eyes. I know. But we are doing what we can, within the bounds of safety and reason. Takeshi's situation is something we can help with, and we need to focus on him. In time, when things get better for the clan, we might have the chance to help Lord Fourth's son. Chapter 32, Chapter 29, Shisui is annoyingly OP. Third-person POV. Under the dense forest of Konoha, far in the northeast corner, the sound of clashing metal, explosions, and the swift movements of two young shinobi echoed throughout the otherwise expected silence. Takeshi and Itaka clashed, their bodies blurring in and out of sight as they engaged in one of their usual intense yet friendly sparring sessions. Takeshi initiated the attack with a swift downward strike, his training katana slicing through the air with lethal grace. Itaka met the attack head-on with his kunao, their weapons clashing with a sharp ring before they pushed each other off, creating space before launching back into their fight. Without a moment's pause, Takeshi pivoted on his heel, swinging his katana horizontally. Itaka ducked, feeling the rush of wind above his head as the blade missed him by mere inches. He countered with a rapid series of shuriken throws, each aimed with deadly precision. Takeshi spun his blade, deflecting the projectiles with a skillful twirl. Wind style, vacuum blade, Takeshi intoned calmly, forming a series of quick hand seals before infusing his training katana with wind chakra. Seeing this, Itaka leapt high into the air, landing on a branch as he formed his own seals. Fire style, fireball jutsu. A massive fireball erupted from his mouth, hurtling towards Takeshi with incredible speed. Takeshi smiled faintly at the sight, then swung his wind-infused katana, cleaving the fireball in two and sending the flames off course in an explosion of smoke. As the smoke cleared, Takeshi saw Itaka descending from the branch with a flurry of kicks. Takeshi blocked and parried in a blur of coordinated strikes before Itaka took a step back, attempting a leg sweep, which Takeshi avoided by jumping above the attack, flipping in midair and landing behind him with a faint smile. With a burst of speed, Takeshi aimed a powerful slash at Itaka's back. Itaka barely managed to dodge, the blade grazing his shirt. He retaliated with a spinning kick, which Takeshi caught, using the momentum to hurl Itaka into a nearby tree. Hurt but not out of the fight, Itaka landed gracefully, immediately creating three shadow clones that surrounded Takeshi. The clones attacked simultaneously, trying to force Takeshi to fight on all sides and give an opening. Takeshi's blade weaved in a deadly dance, cutting through two of the clones with precision and ease. The last remaining clone managed to land a punch on Takeshi's side, but he absorbed the blow, using the opening to deliver a devastating elbow strike that dispelled the clone. The real Itaka emerged from the shadows, launching a barrage of shuriken. Takeshi deflected them with ease with his blade, but Itaka used the distraction to close the distance. They clashed once more, their weapons sparking with each impact. Takeshi feigned a low strike with his blade, then pivoted into a high kick that caught Itaka completely off guard, hitting him in the chin, giving Takeshi the opening to end the fight with a direct strike to his chest, pushing Itaka to the ground. That makes it 18-11 in my favor, Takeshi smirked, extending a hand to help Itaka up from the ground. Itaka grunted, wiping a mix of dirt and sweat from his forehead before accepting the offered hand. Rub it in, why don't you? Itaka sighed, smiling at his friend. Now, how about we greet our little fan? Takeshi said, a faint smile on his face as he turned around. Itaka looked around, his eyes scanning the trees. Someone was watching. Of course, Takeshi replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. He's been watching us since we started. At this, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light with a relaxed, confident stride. He had a friendly smile on his face, his dark hair, onyx eyes and fan crest on the back of his uniform, marking him unmistakably as another member of the Uchiha clan. He raised a hand in greeting. Hello there. Impressive sparring session, got my blood pumping and all. Who are you? Itaka asked, narrowing his eyes slightly as he assessed the newcomer. The young man chuckled, scratching the back of his head in a sheepish manner. Ah, where are my manners? I'm Shisui Uchiha. And yes, I know I was being a little creep watching you two fight, but I just couldn't help but watch your spar. You two are quite the pair of geniuses. Shisui Uchiha. Takeshi repeated, his curiosity piqued. I've heard that name before. You're the one they call Shisui of the body flicker, right? Shisui nodded, his smile widening. That's right. But please, no need for formalities. Just call me the most awesome shinobi, senpai, or Mr. Shisui. I won't call you any of that, Takeshi replied, raising an eyebrow. Itaki, on the other hand, inclined his head slightly in respect. It's an honor to meet you, Shisui. I've heard stories about your skills. Your body flicker technique is said to be unmatched. Shisui waved a hand dismissively. Oh, those are just rumors. Which are 125% true. Takeshi chuckled. You were watching us for a while. Any tips or critiques you might have? Ah, I see, already trusting your good senpai to give you advice. Shisui's expression turned thoughtful as he considered the question. Your techniques are solid, and your coordination is impressive. But remember, speed and power are not everything. Sometimes, the key to victory lies in unpredictability and adaptability. Always be ready to change your strategy mid-fight. I will keep that in mind, Takeshi nodded. You're a genin? Itaki asked, his eyes on Shisui's headband. Yep, but not for long. I will take the Jounin exam in a few months, Shisui replied, a confident glint in his eyes as he puffed his chest. Okay, good luck, Itaki nodded before turning his attention back to Takeshi. Mom invited you to dinner tonight, are you coming? I wouldn't miss your mom's cooking for the end of the world, Takeshi replied, nodding, both completely ignoring Shisui now. Can I come? Shisui asked, completely unbothered he was being ignored by the two. No, Itaki replied. We don't know you. How about this, let's spar. If I win, you guys become my friends. Shisui suggested, his eyes gleaming with a youthful challenge. Itaki and Takeshi glanced at each other, the idea of a friendly match stirring their competitive spirits. Itaki was the first to respond. And if you lose? He asked, a small smirk playing on his lips. Shisui's response was confident and resounding. I'm not going to lose. Arita Takeshi, POV. I got my ass kicked. There was no other way to explain or describe what happened. I got my ass tossed and handed back to me on a silver platter. Even with the help of Itaki, I couldn't land a single hit on Shisui, and the entire experience was both frustrating and enlightening. There was a level of skill and finesse that Shisui possessed that was leagues beyond what Itaki and I had. It was almost like fighting a phantom. In our defense, the guy is known as Shisui of the body flicker, despite being a genin, so it wasn't like we were fighting a run-of-the-mill shinobi. Still, the fact that he dodged every single one of our attacks like it was nothing yet, my pride took a hit. But man, was it something to watch. At one point, I swear he must have split into 12 after images, all solid but at the same time, not. I was dodging one Shisui while another was flipping Itaki, and a third was just chilling in a tree, eating a snack, probably thinking about what he was going to have for dinner with us at Mikoto's house. And then, just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished, leaving Itaki and me flailing at thin air. I tried using the Phantom Mirage, thinking I could catch him off guard by using a technique similar to the body flicker in terms of use. The only thing I caught was a lesson in how to look like an idiot. Shisui sidestepped my attack with a playful smirk that said, "Nice try, kid," before he tapped me on the shoulder and sent me sprawling to the ground. Itaki didn't fare much better. I had never seen Itaki eat more dirt in my life than I did today. Hell, Shisui threw poor Itaki to the ground so much that I was starting to think he was keeping a score or something. By the end of the spar, we were both on the ground, panting and bruised, while Shisui stood there without a single scratch, looking like he had just taken a leisurely stroll through the park. And you know what the worst part was? It wasn't that Shisui had that easygoing smile on his face, like he was just having fun the whole time. Like he wasn't even trying. It wasn't that I was getting my ass kicked. It was that for the entire match, Teresa was enjoying herself, watching me struggle with an amused smile. The only thing she was missing was some popcorn. Chapter 33, Chapter 30, Anko Mitarashi. Arita Takeshi, POV. As the night fell, I was training in one of the many grounds around Konoha, specifically training ground number 3, running through my drills. Nothing too overly complicated, just me training my body. Not every training session had to be about mastering a technique. In fact, it was best if you spaced out training sessions to get the most out of them. As I finished running around the training ground, I felt a presence approaching 2 chakras, one of them massive. Turning around, I saw 2 figures entering the training ground. One was a man with pale skin and long black hair, wearing a dark robe, and beside him was a girl a few years older than me, with wild hair and an enthusiastic expression. It took me a moment to recognize who this man was. Orochimaru. Lord Orochimaru, the girl said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Let's start with the new techniques you promised to teach me. Orochimaru's golden eyes glanced at me, ignoring the girl, a hint of interest in his gaze. Ah, who do we have here? He said, his voice smooth and somewhat unsettling. A young prodigy, perhaps. I nodded, a faint smile on my face. A pleasure to meet you, Lord Orochimaru. The girl frowned at her sensei for not paying attention to her before turning her gaze to me, recognition dawning on her face. Oh, I know you. You're the one everyone's talking about. The genius who trains with the other genius, the Uchiha brat, right? I shrugged, not really sure how to respond. I guess so. Orochimaru's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Training alone can be beneficial, but learning from others can push your limits even further. He turned to the girl. Anko, would you care to share your training session with him today? So that's Anko. Anko looked annoyed at the proposition, her brow furrowing. Sensei, he's just a kid, genius or not. I'm a Jounin now, and he's just an academy student. Are you sure about this? Orochimaru's smile widened, and he placed a hand on Anko's shoulder. Ah, Anko, I know, but geniuses tend to surprise us when we least expect it. It would be beneficial for you to learn from someone with raw talent far superior to yours, even if he is younger. Don't you agree? There was something unsettling in the way he spoke, the way his golden eyes seemed to gleam with hidden amusement. Anko glanced between Orochimaru and me, clearly hesitant but unable to refuse her sensei's request. I guess they won't even ask if I want to do this or not. Very well then, I might as well test my skills against someone other than Itaki or Shisui. Fine, she muttered, crossing her arms. But don't expect me to go easy on you. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. I wouldn't expect anything less. Orochimaru's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before he stepped back. Excellent. Now, let's see how our young prodigy fares against Konoha's newest Jounin. Only taijutsu, understood, Anko. Anko sighed, stepping forward and rolling her shoulders. All right, brat, let's see what you've got. We took our positions on the training ground, as Anko's eyes narrowed, her body language shifting into a stance that radiated confidence and readiness. Ready when you are, I said, my own stance mirroring hers, a calm focus settling over me. Without warning, Anko dashed forward, her speed leaving a lot to be desired, as she launched a series of swift strikes, each one aimed with precision but ultimately too slow to be of impact, making it unimaginably easy to read her chakra flow, allowing me to anticipate her every move with ease before she even moved. What? Anko stammered, shock spreading across her face as I effortlessly evaded her attempted hits. You? How are you doing this? Under other circumstances, she would have fared a whole lot better in this setting. I had to give her credit where it was due, her strikes were fast and powerful, showing just how much she had trained to be where she was right now. However, my ability to preemptively sense her chakra and my physical training allowed me to stay one step ahead of her every move. It was one of those things that went hand in hand. Being able to read her chakra flow alone wouldn't be enough if I wasn't fast enough to move accordingly. Still, she was very talented, not as much as Shisui, that smiling little monster, not even close for that matter, but very talented nonetheless. Hell, if I were to stop reading the flow of her chakra, I think this fight would lean in her favor. But I wasn't one to handicap myself for no reason. Besides, who wants to win a fight against an enemy that limited themselves to give you a fair shot? Anko's attacks became more aggressive, her growing frustration evident. I could see her pushing herself harder, determined to prove her superiority. Interesting, Orochimaru murmured from the sidelines, his eyes fixed on me. In hindsight, I might be tempting the snakes by not handicapping myself. I can almost hear him salivating. But I suppose that's a problem for future me. Besides, there are some benefits to having so many people interested in me. One of them is that Danzo won't let Orochimaru touch me, because he feels I belong to him. Sometimes things just work out in your favor. Stop dodging, you little imp. Anko all but growled. Very well, I replied, a faint smile on my face as I moved forward, countering her strikes with a series of quick, calculated moves, using my smaller size and speed to my advantage. You're very skilled, but overly confident in your abilities. Anko's eyes narrowed as she launched a series of rapid kicks my way, but like before, I dodged each one with a composed grace, my movements fluid and confident. You leave yourself wide open after every attack, I remarked, lightly tapping her shoulder as I evaded another strike. Because you look down on me. Chuckling, Orochimaru raised a hand. Enough. Sensei. I wasn't done. Anko protested, a note of desperation creeping into her voice as she gritted her teeth. Are you sure you are a Jounin? I interjected, tilting my head. She turned to me, dark eyes flashing indignantly. Listen here, you little shit. That's enough, Anko, Orochimaru interrupted, a thin smile playing on his lips. The boy has made his point. Learn from it. If you hadn't underestimated him, things might have been different. Might, I said, a faint smile on my face. Anko huffed with frustration, but bowed her head in acquiescence. Yes, sensei, she replied, still throwing me a venomous glare from the corner of her eye. Well, that felt good. Finally getting a win, after all the humiliating defeats I get on a weekly basis at the hands of Shisui. Though that begs the question, how is it that he's a genin, but she's a chunin? Their skills are on two whole different levels. I should ask Lord Fugaku about it, because it makes no sense. After my sparring/ego-boosting session with Anko, I made my way back home. However, as soon I reached my neighborhood, I felt a familiar chakra inside my house. Well, damn it, I muttered, opening the door to my house. Finding the sight of Shisui, lounging comfortably on my sofa, happily munching on some food, looking completely at ease as if he owned the place. Welcome home, Takeshi. Shisui called out, waving a hand with a wide grin on his face. I hope you don't mind, but I helped myself to some snacks. You've got quite the stash here. I sighed, closing the door behind me. Shisui, what are you doing here? He shrugged, still chewing on a piece of dango. Just thought I'd drop by and see how my favorite little prodigy is doing. Plus, your place is so cozy. And look at all this food. How could I resist? I rolled my eyes, feeling a mix of annoyance and amusement. Shisui had a way of turning up unexpectedly and making himself at home, which was both endearing and irritating. Make yourself at home, why don't you? Thanks, I will. He replied cheerfully, patting the space next to him on the sofa. Come on, sit down and relax. You've been training hard, haven't you? I can tell. I hesitated for a moment before plopping down next to him. Yeah, training with Itaki and then sparring with Anko today. It's been a busy day. Shisui's eyes lit up with interest. Anko, hey? How did that go? I won, I replied, going over to the kitchen to grab a drink. So, did you know Lady Mikoto wants you to move in with them, right? Shisui asked, promptly changing the topic. His usual grin was replaced by a more serious expression as he stared at me, awaiting my response. I paused, setting down the glass of water I had been holding. The Uchiha matriarch's proposal wasn't news to me. In fact, we had talked about it a week ago, and I had accepted the proposition, but before moving with them, I needed to do a few things around the house. This place was still my home, and one day I would live in here, so I needed to fix the place before moving back. That was my self-imposed rule. I know. We talked about it last week, I replied, leaning back against the counter. And I agreed to move in with them. But there are a few things I need to take care of here before I can leave. Shisui raised an eyebrow, looking as if he wanted to press further but decided against it. He simply nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face as he looked around my place. Do you need help fixing things around this place? How did he realize that's the reason I'm still here? I haven't told anyone the real reason. He's very perceptive. I do, but I want to do it alone, I replied, my gaze falling to the broken wooden floorboards beneath my feet. It's important to me. Chapter 34, Chapter 31, The Toad Sage. Orochimaru's lab. Under the dim, flickering light of his underground laboratory in Konoha, Orochimaru's fingers deftly moved over an array of tubes and vials. His eyes, golden and serpentine, reflected the gleam of the scientific instruments scattered around. The laboratory was filled with the hum of machines and the quiet murmurs of Orochimaru's ambitious plans. He worked with a feverish intensity, his mind a whirl of dark thoughts and sinister intentions. Each vial and tube held the promise of a new discovery, a step closer to his ultimate goal. He was in his element here, amidst the cold steel and glass, where he could probe the very essence of life itself. Here, no one could hear the screams of his experiments. As he worked, his mind drifted back to the training ground earlier that day. The image of the young boy, Takeshi Arita, effortlessly dodging Anko's attacks played over and over in his head. It was rare to see such raw talent, especially in one so young. Takeshi's movements had been fluid, almost preternatural, each step and dodge executed with an eerie precision. That boy! Orochimaru muttered to himself, a slow, sinister smile curling his lips as his body shuddered in barely contained pleasure. He moves with a grace and precision that surpasses his years. His potential is intoxicating. He relished the thought of Takeshi's raw talent, his abilities a tantalizing mystery waiting to be unraveled, to be cut open, to be understood. Orochimaru's mind raced with possibilities. Takeshi's power, his remarkable agility, and his fighting instincts all pointed to a unique and fascinating genetic makeup. His files were both detailed and lacking, as nobody really knew what the boy was capable of or what his bloodline did. He could be a perfect subject for my experiments, Orochimaru mused, his voice low and dripping with dark anticipation. Imagine the secrets his body holds. The potential to unlock abilities even he is unaware of. His thoughts grew darker as he imagined the myriad ways he could dissect and study the boy, delving into the depths of his genetic code. Orochimaru's fingers paused over a particularly volatile concoction, his eyes narrowing with a predatory gleam. He could even be his perfect body. But there's always the Sharingan, he whispered, his voice taking on a feverish edge. The legendary eyes of the Uchiha clan, capable of seeing through any deception, mastering any jutsu. The boy is remarkable, yes, but the Sharingan. It offers an even greater promise. A power that can evolve, adapt, and transform. A power that could grant me the immortality I seek. The allure of the Sharingan was almost impossible to resist. It was a power that could change the very fabric of his existence under the correct circumstances, granting him abilities beyond his wildest dreams. Orochimaru's ambitions stretched far beyond the capabilities of a single child, no matter how gifted. The Sharingan represented a key to a much broader and more profound array of possibilities. He could be so much more, Orochimaru murmured, a dark smile playing on his lips. But the Sharingan. It is the ultimate prize. He resumed his work, his mind made up. For now, the boy will remain as he is, Orochimaru decided, his tone resolute. My true focus must remain on obtaining the Sharingan. But I will keep an eye on Takeshi. His potential is too great to ignore completely. I might even give him the curse mark, just in case Anko dies from it, Kukiku. It was never bad to have a backup in case the experiments didn't go according to plan. Mitarashi Anko. Anko Mitarashi seethed with anger as she went through her training exercises, each movement sharper and more forceful than usual. The training ground was nearly empty, save for a few other shinobi practicing in the distance, but Anko paid them no mind. Her focus was entirely on her own frustration. How could this happen? She was a recently promoted Jounin, and she was damn proud of her skills and strength, and yet she had been humiliated by a kid 6 years younger than her. A kid who hadn't even graduated from the academy yet. Stupid brat, she muttered under her breath, launching a barrage of kunao at a nearby target. Each blade hit dead center, but it did nothing to alleviate her anger. Who does he think he is, dodging all my attacks like that? And with such a smug look on his face too. It angered her to the core how he had been smiling the entire fight, with that damn stupidly annoying faint smile that said, I'm better, deal with it. She replayed the fight in her mind, cringing at how easily Takeshi had dodged her every move. It was as if he had known what she was going to do before she even did it. Her pride smarted from the memory, and she tightened her grip on her kunao. I'm the cool one, the unstoppable one. She fumed, slicing through the air with a ferocity that left her breathing hard. I've trained with Orochimaru-sensei. One of the legendary Sunin. I've mastered techniques most people can only dream of. How could I be shown up by some snot-nosed, short-sized academy kid? Anko paused, panting slightly as she wiped the sweat from her brow. She was sure she must have looked ridiculous, ranting to herself in the middle of the training ground, but she didn't care. She needed to vent, to let out the pent-up frustration that had been gnawing at her since the sparring match, and if anyone wanted to complain, she would kick their ass. And that smile? She continued, her voice rising in indignation as she returned to the point of his smile. Like he was enjoying every second of making me look like a fool. I'll show him. I'll train even harder, get even stronger, and next time, he won't stand a chance. I will humiliate him so bad that he will need therapy. She envisioned the next time they would meet, picturing herself as the victor, standing over a defeated Takeshi. The thought brought a fierce grin to her face, a gleam of determination in her eyes. She would not let this go unanswered. He thinks he's so great, but I'm going to show him what it means to be a real shinobi, Anko declared, throwing another set of kunao with renewed vigor. Just wait, kid. The next time we face off, I'll be the one smiling. Hokage's office. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat at his desk, buried under a mountain of paperwork. It was days like this that made him wish paperwork was illegal. His office was dimly lit, the only light coming from the lamp on his desk and the faint glow of the moon outside the window. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on his shoulders, and the normally stoic leader felt every bit of his age tonight. As he signed another document, a soft knock echoed through the room, and before Hiruzen could respond, the door opened. Jiraiya, his old student, stepped inside. His usually jovial expression was replaced with a somber one, his shoulders slumped in grief. Sensei, Jiraiya began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. We need to talk. Hiruzen looked up, his weary eyes meeting Jiraiya's. He gestured for Jiraiya to take a seat, setting aside his pen. Jiraiya, it's good to see you. When did you arrive at the village? Just an hour ago, Jiraiya admitted, sitting down heavily. I went to watch my godson at the orphanage before coming here. What do you need to talk about, Jiraiya? Hiruzen asked. Jiraiya sighed heavily, sinking into the chair opposite Hiruzen. It's about Minato, and Naruto. Hiruzen nodded, his expression grim. The loss of Minato, the fourth Hokage, and his wife Kushina had been a devastating blow to the village. And now, the fate of their newborn son, Naruto, Jiraiya's godson, hung in the balance. I've been thinking, Jiraiya continued, his voice tinged with guilt. Minato was my student, he was like a son to me. Maybe I should take care of Naruto. He's my godson, after all. Minato entrusted him to me. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, studying Jiraiya closely. I understand your feelings, Jiraiya. But you must remember the situation we're in. If anyone were to see you with Naruto, they would immediately connect the dots. It would put Naruto in even greater danger. Jiraiya clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. I know, but it feels like I'm failing Minato all over again. I wasn't here when the attack happened, and you're telling me I can't be here for what is left of him? He trusted me, and now I can't even protect his son. Hiruzen's gaze softened, understanding the pain and guilt Jiraiya was experiencing. You're not failing him, Jiraiya. Keeping Naruto's identity a secret is the best way to protect him right now. The fewer people who know the truth, the safer he will be. Jiraiya looked down, his shoulders sagging further. It just feels wrong, leaving him here alone. He deserves to know who his parents were, to have someone who cares for him. He will know, Hiruzen assured him, his voice gentle but firm. When the time is right, he will learn about his parents and their sacrifices. But for now, he needs to be kept safe. And that means keeping his identity a secret, even from himself. Jiraiya nodded slowly, accepting the painful truth. I understand, Hiruzen-sensei. It's just hard to accept. I know, Hiruzen said, reaching out to place a comforting hand on Jiraiya's shoulder. But remember, you can still watch over him from the shadows. You can still be there for him, even if he doesn't know it. Jiraiya managed a small, sad smile. I suppose you're right. I just wish there was another way. We all do, Hiruzen replied softly. But for now, this is the best way to ensure his safety. And in time, Naruto will come to understand and appreciate the sacrifices that were made for him. Jiraiya stood, taking a deep breath. Thank you, Hiruzen-sensei. I'll do my best to protect him from the shadows, as you said. Are you planning on staying for much longer? Hiruzen asked, looking up at Jiraiya. Jiraiya shook his head, raking a hand through his spiky white hair. I think it's time I left. The longer I stay, the more questions will be raised. You should come more often, Hiruzen nodded, a sad smile on his face. Jiraiya stood at the doorway, hesitating once more before fully stepping back into the office. Sensei, he began, his tone cautious, there's something else I need to discuss. Hiruzen looked up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow. What is it, Jiraiya? Jiraiya closed the door behind him, his expression serious. Since I entered the village, I've been sensing a powerful source of natural energy. It's unlike anything I've felt before. Do you know anything about it? Hiruzen's eyes widened slightly, and he leaned forward, his interest piqued. Natural energy, you say? Do you have any idea where it's coming from? Jiraiya nodded. Yes, it's coming from the merchant district close to the Uchihas. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, considering Jiraiya's words carefully. There is one person who stands out around that area, Arata Takeshi. He's shown remarkable abilities, even for someone so young. Jiraiya's eyes widened in surprise. Arata Takeshi? Minato talked a lot about him in his letters. He said Kushina had basically adopted him, though knowing her, she most likely kidnapped the boy more often than not. Hiruzen nodded, a chuckle escaping his tired demeanor. Yes. He was quite close to them, he was the one that warned us about the intruder. Perhaps if we had paid attention to his warnings more, things would have been different. Chapter 35, Chapter 32, Uzumaki Naruto. Hokage Tower. Hiruzen watched Jiraiya's retreating form with a thoughtful expression. The revelation about Takeshi's natural energy was troubling, and he knew they needed to handle the situation delicately. The only experts in sage arts were Minato and Jiraiya, and one of them was already dead. Although he wasn't a sage himself, Hiruzen knew the dangers of uncontrolled natural energy. Jiraiya, he called out, stopping the toad sage in his tracks. Jiraiya turned back, a questioning look on his face. Before you go. What is it, Hiruzen-sensei? Jiraiya asked. Hiruzen leaned forward. I think it would be wise for you to stay in the village for a while longer. We need to better understand Takeshi's situation and the extent of his abilities. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. You want me to keep an eye on him personally? Hiruzen nodded. Yes. Your expertise in natural energy and sage techniques could be invaluable. The truth of the matter is, we have no idea how his bloodline works, and with Minato gone, you're the only expert we have on the matter. Jiraiya crossed his arms, considering Hiruzen's request. I see your point, but you know staying in one place for too long isn't my style. I have my own responsibilities outside the village. Besides, I don't think I would be able to stop myself from taking Naruto if I stayed here. Hiruzen's expression softened. I understand that, Jiraiya. But this boy could be crucial to the future of the village. Danzo is interested in him, and that's never something good, which means there's something truly exceptional about his potential. We need someone we can trust to ensure he's guided properly. Jiraiya sighed, running a hand through his hair. Well, damn, all right, I'll stay. But just for a week or so. I'll observe Takeshi, see what he's capable of, and try to understand his connection to natural energy. But once I've done that, I'll have to return to my duties. There's something else you should know, Hiruzen began, his tone somber. Minato and I used to talk, and he had plans to take Takeshi as his student after he graduated from the academy. Until today, I didn't know why exactly, I just thought it was because the kid had unmeasurable potential, one he wanted to nurture. But I think I know the real reason now. Jiraiya's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He might have seen something in him beyond potential alone. Hiruzen nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. I believe that too. Minato was very perceptive. He believed Takeshi had unique potential, one that needed careful nurturing and guidance. He saw in Takeshi a spark that reminded him of his own journey, and he was determined to help the boy reach his full potential. Jiraiya leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He probably sensed what I sensed. It's quite easy once you become a sage, and Minato was way more attuned to the sage arts than I ever was. Hiruzen stroked his beard thoughtfully. It's possible. Minato was sensitive to such things, and he was always looking for ways to strengthen the village. He must have recognized something extraordinary in Takeshi, and he must have kept it to himself to avoid others finding out. Jiraiya nodded slowly. That would make sense. If I were Minato, I would have kept the kid's power a secret for a while to avoid others trying to exploit him, he sighed. If Takeshi has a natural affinity for this kind of path, it would explain Minato's interest in training him. He might have seen Takeshi as someone who could potentially learn sage techniques, or at the very least, someone who could benefit from his teachings on a greater scale. Hiruzen sighed, the weight of his years evident in his eyes. It's tragic that Minato isn't here to guide him. But that's why your presence is so crucial, Jiraiya. You're the only other sage we have. But staying here would endanger Naruto. Jiraiya scratched his chin, deep in thought. It would, and it's a big responsibility, sensei. But if Minato believed in the kid, then I suppose I should too. I'll do what I can to help him, but I won't be staying here to do so. Hiruzen smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. You plan on taking him with you, right? Jiraiya nodded, a determined look on his face. If the situation is as we imagine, then yes, but only when he's older, maybe once he becomes a Jounin or a Chunin. Normally, I'd be extremely concerned about his ability to naturally produce natural energy. Such an affinity typically leads to terrible side effects like petrification or losing control completely. But from what Minato wrote in his letters, and based on what you've told me about the kid, he seems fine, too fine even, perhaps even unaware of his power, or maybe unaffected. Either way, this indicates there's no immediate rush. Hiruzen nodded, relief washing over his aged features. That's a wise decision, Jiraiya. I think Minato would have wanted Takeshi to grow up in a peaceful environment before delving too deep into all of this. Perhaps that's why he never took him as his apprentice, despite wanting to. Arata Takeshi, POV. I walked through the streets of Konoha, making my way to one of the local orphanages in the area. It had been months since the Nine Tails incident, and I had been avoiding visiting the orphanage where Naruto lived out of self-imposed guilt. I knew it hadn't been my fault, but I couldn't help it. Every time I thought about it, it felt like a constant reminder of my failure to protect Minato and Kushina. Today, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to see Naruto, to make sure he was okay. I knew he would be, because of the series, but I had to see it. I needed to face this situation like a band-aid and rip it off before I decided to just wait another day. As I walked, the orphanage loomed ahead, a drab building that seemed out of place amidst the rebuilding village. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the scent of disinfectant and old wood hitting my nose. The sound of crying echoed through the halls, which I supposed was to be expected in an orphanage. As I walked further in, I looked through the rooms while avoiding the staff, mostly out of idle curiosity, seeing multiple kids of many ages, some older than me, others much younger. Eventually, I found what I was looking for inside the orphanage, the biggest chakra in the area. I spotted one of the staff holding Naruto, her grip tight and her expression one of frustration and utter hate. She was shaking him, trying to get him to stop crying or maybe trying to just stop him from doing anything at all. I wasn't sure. Either way, my heart clenched at the sight, and a surge of anger welled up inside me. Stop crying, you little monster! She hissed, shaking him harder. Something inside me snapped. Before I knew it, I was already across the room, my hand clamping down on her wrist with a grip of iron, my nails digging into her skin. Let him go, I growled, my voice low and dangerous. The matron's eyes widened in shock, but she didn't release Naruto. Who do you think you are? She demanded, trying to pull away to no avail. My vision blurred, a red haze creeping in at the edges. I could feel a familiar, primal energy surging through me. I said, let him go, I repeated, my voice colder than ice. With a quick twist, I wrenched her arm back, hearing the sickening snap of bones breaking. She screamed in pain, dropping Naruto in the process. I caught him, cradling him protectively against my chest. The matron fell to the floor, clutching her broken arm and sobbing. As I watched her whimper on the floor, fear taking over her, a single thought crossed my mind. Killing her would be so easy, easier than breathing, just a bit of pressure, and her head would pop like a balloon. I could almost taste the horrified silence that would follow, the red splatter standing in vivid contrast against the drab floor, her lifeless eyes staring at nothing. A slight tremble passed through my hands as my imagination began to run wild. Yet, somehow I managed to keep my emotions in check, pressing my lips into a thin line. Had this happened before? How long had the staff here been abusing Kushina's son? Had I left him to suffer for months under their hands? I gritted my teeth, glaring at the whimpering piece of trash on the floor trying to crawl away from me. I needed to leave this place, or I would end up killing every adult in this orphanage, but I couldn't leave Naruto with them, or take him with me. Jiraiya POV. I made my way through the village, wondering what to do now. Leaving the village felt wrong, staying felt wrong, why couldn't things be easy for old Jiraiya? I supposed either way, I would feel bad. As I continued wandering through the village, I felt a sudden flare of powerful, untamed chakra. Natural energy, unmistakably potent and raw. It was unlike anything I'd felt before, and it was coming from the orphanage where Naruto was. Natural energy wasn't supposed to feel this, dark and hungry. My heart raced as I rushed toward the source. What could have caused such a surge? Had someone attacked? Had Takeshi lost control? I really hoped I hadn't been wrong when thinking the boy didn't need immediate help. Wasting no time, I arrived at the orphanage and kicked the door open. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. There was the brat sensei was talking about, holding baby Naruto protectively in his arms, his gaze locked onto a woman on the floor who was clutching her arm and whimpering in pain. The kid's eyes were unlike anything I'd ever seen, cat-like, yellow, and predatory. The natural energy radiating from him was intense, different from what I was used to, different from Ma and Pa. His energy was almost suffocating in nature. "Kid," I called out, my voice steady but firm. "What's going on here?" Takeshi's head snapped toward me, his golden eyes narrowing. For a moment, I saw pure animalistic rage in his eyes, but it quickly faded as he seemed to recognize me. Maybe the kid was a fan of my work. "She was hurting Naruto," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I couldn't let her get away with it, or rather I couldn't control myself. Pick your poison." I glanced at the matron, then back at Takeshi. The kid was shaking slightly, showing the struggle, the natural energy still swirling around him. It was taking everything out of him not to kill everyone in this room. It was honestly impressive, the level of control he had over his own instincts at this moment. "It's okay, kiddo, just calm down," I said softly, taking a step closer. "Take a deep breath. Everything's okay." Takeshi's grip on Naruto tightened slightly, but he took a deep breath, and slowly, the energy around him began to dissipate. His eyes gradually returned to their normal color. I could see the exhaustion and strain on his face as he fought to rein in the wild power within him. It had taken a lot out of him just to avoid hurting the people inside the orphanage. Meaning his power is directly connected to his emotions, at least to some level, and even then, he had managed to keep himself under control, despite wanting to kill the matron. No wonder Minato wanted to teach him. His bloodlust had subsided just as fast as it had come, replaced with an icy calm that was just as unsettling in a child his age. His protective hold on Naruto didn't waver, a faint glimmer of resolution lighting up in his silver eyes. He went from wanting to kill everyone in the room to being completely and almost unnaturally calm. "Well, that settles it. This kid is creepy, it reminds me of Orochi." "Nah, no one is that creepy, but my point still stands." "So, kid, do you want an ice cream?" I asked, attempting to break the silence and lighten the atmosphere, not an easy feat given the circumstances. But I was an awesome guy, so I had no doubts I could make the situation better. Takeshi blinked, the cold mask slipping slightly as he turned his sharp gaze towards me. Then, with a slight nod, he agreed. "Sure, let's go then." Chapter 36, Chapter 33, A Wise Pervert. Jiraiya POV. The sun was setting over Konoha, casting a warm golden glow across the village. I had taken Takeshi and baby Naruto to a nearby park to calm things down after the incident at the orphanage, which was something I would have to talk with sensei about. Anyway, we sat on a bench, each of us holding an ice cream cone. Takeshi was holding his with one hand, the other arm securely cradling Naruto, who seemed content to gnaw on his tiny fingers. He looked a lot like Minato, sure, he had the usual Uzumaki features here and there, but the boy was the living image of Minato. "So," I started, trying to lighten the mood, "what's a toad's favorite kind of music?" I paused for effect, wiggling my eyebrows. "Hip-hop. There's no way the kid can resist my best toad joke." Takeshi gave me a polite smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's a good one," he said, taking a small lick of his ice cream. "I guess I need to work on my material." I sighed inwardly. The kid was guarded, and who could blame him? He'd been through more than most shinobi twice his age. "So, how have you been holding up, Takeshi?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light but genuine. "Fine," Takeshi replied, holding Naruto a little tighter. It seems he wasn't even questioning how I knew about him. Or maybe he didn't care. I studied him for a moment. It was clear he wasn't ready to open up, or rather didn't think it was necessary to do so. That was the problem with geniuses, they often found a way to rationalize their stupid behavior. You know, Takeshi, I said, taking a bite of my own ice cream, it's okay to feel angry and out of control sometimes. He glanced at me, his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. I suppose, he said quietly. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Kid, I know how you feel. I've been in your shoes more than once, and let me tell you, holding everything in isn't healthy either. You're strong, Takeshi. No one doubts that. But you're also human. It's okay to feel things deeply, it's okay to just be mad or sad or angry without having to explain why. He looked down at Naruto, who was now gurgling happily. It's just, when I saw her hurting Naruto, something inside me snapped. I couldn't control my emotions for a bit. That's understandable, I said gently, taking a deep breath. But don't sell yourself short, brat, you managed not to kill anyone in that orphanage, that's something. Especially considering that if I had been the one to find that woman hurting Naruto, shaking him with hate, I would have killed every single adult in that miserable building. I'm starting to question Sensei's decision not to let me take care of Naruto. Takeshi looked up at me, a faint empty smile on his face. I suppose that's quite the achievement. Considering Kushina would have killed them. I guess that pretty much confirms the kid knows who Naruto's real parents are, which is not surprising considering how much time he spent with Kushina and Minato. And he was right, Kushina would have killed everyone in that orphanage, and would have tried to kill Sensei, ha ha ha, I'm almost sad I can't see that happening. I chuckled, lightly patting Takeshi's shoulder. She'd have given them hell, that's for sure. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing my words. Thank you, Lord Jiraiya, for the ice cream. Lord Jiraiya, hey? Not super pervert, I guess the kid is a fan after all, can't blame him, I'm awesome like that. Though I would have accepted the pervert title too, I am proud of all of my accomplishments, including that one. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds being the distant laughter of children playing and the soft coos of baby Naruto. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I decided to try again. You know, Takeshi, Minato had big plans for you, I said, watching him carefully. He believed in your potential, and he wanted to help you grow into a great ninja. Takeshi's grip on Naruto tightened slightly. He did, hey? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I nodded. He saw something special in you, something worth nurturing. And now that I met you in person, I see it too. You're not alone in this. We're all here for you. He looked down at the baby in his arms, a myriad of emotions flickering across his face. I miss them, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. My parents. Minato. Kushina, I miss them all. They were always there for me. And they still are, I said gently. In here. I tapped his chest. In your heart and your memories. They wouldn't want you to carry this burden alone. Let those around you help. Takeshi nodded, a single tear escaping down his cheek. Okay, he whispered. I'll try. That's all anyone can ask, I said, ruffling his hair. One step at a time. You are very wise for a world-renowned pervert, Takeshi smiled lightly. And there is the pervert comment. Well, I laughed, scratching my head in embarrassment. It's all about balance, sometimes I'm a renowned pervert, sometimes I'm a writer, and other times I'm a wise old toad sage. That's life. We continued to sit in the park, the ice cream slowly melting in our hands, as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and I knew that with time and support, Takeshi would find his way, and maybe just maybe, I would find mine as well. In the meantime, however, I had to have a talk with Sensei about Naruto's condition, and about the staff at the orphanage. Even if Naruto wasn't the son of Minato, she had no right to treat a baby like that. Arata Takeshi, POV. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Konoha, I made my way back home. Naruto had been taken back to the orphanage by some ANBU, who probably would have attacked me if it weren't for Jiraiya being there. After that, Jiraiya had seen me off with a warm, albeit slightly awkward, smile. The man was different from what I expected. My memories of him in the show portrayed a different image of him, one more comical than anything else. I couldn't help but muse over my encounter with Jiraiya. For someone known around the world as the biggest pervert, the guy was surprisingly wise. His words had a way of cutting through the fog of my thoughts, bringing clarity to the chaos that had been swirling inside me today. Wise for a pervert, I muttered to myself, shaking my head with a small smile. Who would have thought? The evening air was cool and crisp, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees lining the streets. I found myself taking a longer route home, not quite ready to face the emptiness of the house just yet. It had only been months since the 9 Tails. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a hollow shell, a constant reminder of what I had lost. Maybe I should just move in with Lady Mikoto and let this go away. As I walked, I thought back to Jiraiya's words. It was okay to feel angry and out of control sometimes. I had been so focused on keeping everything bottled up, on maintaining control, on not letting Danzo see my emotions, that I hadn't allowed myself to grieve properly. To feel the anger, the pain, the loss. But Jiraiya was right. Holding everything in wasn't healthy. And even though I felt alone, I wasn't. I had people who cared about me, who wanted to help. It was a hard lesson to accept, but I knew I had to try. Maybe I should talk with Itaki about this, about Danzo, perhaps he would offer a different perspective. I reached my house and paused at the door, taking a deep breath. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside, the familiar scent of the house washing over me. I dropped my bag by the door and made my way to the living room, where Tsuki, my cat, was already waiting for me, her green eyes watching me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Hey, Tsuki," I murmured, crouching down to scratch her behind the ears. She purred in response, leaning into my touch. "Guess what? I met Jiraiya today." "The Jiraiya? Can you believe it?" She meowed softly, as if in agreement. "And you know what? For a world-renowned pervert, he's actually pretty wise," I continued, a small smile tugging at my lips. Chapter 37, Chapter 34, Moving On. Jiraiya POV. The sun had fully set by the time I made my way back to the Hokage's office. The village was bathed in the soft glow of street lamps, the bustling energy of the day replaced by a calm, almost serene atmosphere. But my mind was far from calm. The incident at the orphanage had left a sour taste in my mouth, and I couldn't let it go without addressing it with Hiruzen. Pushing open the door to the Hokage's office, I found Sensei buried under a mountain of paperwork, as usual. He looked up, his tired eyes meeting mine with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Jiraiya," he greeted, setting down his pen. "What brings you back so soon?" I didn't waste any time, striding over to his desk and placing my hands firmly on the surface, cracking the surface around my hand. "We need to talk, Sensei. About Naruto and the orphanage." Hiruzen's expression turned serious. "What happened?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. Kami knew I was trying my best not to fight my sensei right here and now. "I found Takeshi at the orphanage today, holding Naruto. Apparently one of the matrons was mistreating him, and Takeshi, who is still figuring out how to deal with all of this, found her. She was shaking him and calling him a monster. Takeshi almost killed her in his attempt to protect Naruto, he shattered her arm." Hiruzen's eyes widened in shock, a mix of guilt and worry crossing his features. I didn't know. I thought he was safe there." "Safe?" I snapped, unable to hold back my frustration as my chakra flared up. "You thought he was safe? You've left Naruto in the hands of people who see him as the 9 Tails, not as Minato and Kushina's son. How could you let this happen?" "Scratch that, how in the hell does a simple matron know he's the Jinchuriki? That's supposed to be a S-ranked secret. Part of the reason I wasn't supposed to take Naruto with me was because his status as a Jinchuriki and his parentage was supposed to be kept a damn secret. And the villagers already fucking knew." Hiruzen sighed, rubbing his temples. "I had no idea the staff there would treat him like that. I should have been more vigilant." "Damn right you should have," I retorted, my voice rising, glaring at him. "Naruto deserves better than this. Minato deserves better than this. He deserves to be loved and protected, not abused and hated. Takeshi shouldn't have to step in to protect him because the adults around him are failing to do their jobs." Hiruzen's shoulders sagged, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. "You're right, Jiraiya. I failed him." I took a step back, trying to gather my thoughts. "We need to find someone who can take care of Naruto, someone who understands who he is and what he represents," seeing his Jinchuriki status was already leaked. "Maybe it's time to reconsider the decision to keep him at the orphanage." Hiruzen nodded slowly. I agree. I'll make arrangements to have Naruto moved to a safer environment. I also need to investigate who leaked this information. Whoever did so, committed treason, I said, crossing my arms. I promise you, Jiraiya, Hiruzen said, his voice firm. I'll make sure Naruto is taken care of. And I'll personally oversee his well-being from now on. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Good. Because if I find out something like this happens again, even by some rumor, I won't hesitate to take him myself, no matter what the consequences are. Hiruzen gave me a small, sad smile. I understand, Jiraiya. And thank you for bringing this to my attention. Naruto is lucky to have you looking out for him. If this happened again, there would be no luck involved. I take the kid with me, I would raise him, spy network be damned if sensei didn't keep his word. I failed Minato and Kushina, I won't fail their son. I can't. Third-person POV. As the first light of dawn broke over Konoha, casting a soft golden hue over the village, Takeshi found himself standing outside his house, looking at the belongings he had packed for his move to the Uchiha compound, after having finally decided to move on a bit. Today was the day he would be moving in with Mikoto and Fugaku, leaving behind the emptiness of his own home. He felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a touch of uncertainty. Tsuki, his loyal cat, circled his legs, sensing the change. He reached down to scratch her behind the ears, drawing comfort from her presence. As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard a familiar voice calling out. Takeshi. Ready to go. Itake's calm, composed demeanor came into view, followed closely by a more energetic presence, Shisui, the guy who had adopted himself into Takeshi's and Itake's life. Morning, Takeshi. Shisui called out, practically bouncing on his feet. Ready for the big move? Need a hand with anything? Takeshi smiled faintly at the sight of his friends. Morning, Itake. Shisui. Yeah, I'm ready. Just got a few boxes to carry over. Shisui clapped his hands together, a mischievous grin on his face. All right. Let's get this show on the road. Itake, you take the big stuff. Takeshi, you handle the delicate things. While I'll just supervise and look pretty, okay? Itake rolled his eyes but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. Shisui, let's just get this done without breaking anything. Fine, I'll handle the delicate stuff, Takeshi can look pretty for us this time, Shisui sighed, crossing his arms. Takeshi chuckled, appreciating the light-hearted banter. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the help. With that, the chaotic trio of geniuses set to work. Itake effortlessly lifted the heavier boxes, his strength and precision making it look easy. Shisui, true to his word, handled the more delicate items with surprising care, all the while chattering away, making jokes, and keeping the mood light. Hey, Takeshi, did you know Itake tried to bake a cake today for you? Shisui said with a laugh, carefully placing a box on the cart. It was supposed to be a welcome home cake, but he mixed up the sugar and salt. Let's just say we can use the cake as a weapon in the battlefield now. Itake's ears turned slightly pink, but he maintained his calm demeanor. It's not my fault sugar and salt look the same. Besides, the boars like it. They died from sodium overdose, Itake, Shisui retorted, feigning a serious tone though laughter twinkled in his eyes. Takeshi couldn't help but laugh at the mental image. I'll keep that in mind. Maybe we'll have to test your baking skills again someday. Who knows, maybe you'll be known as Itake the deadly baker of the hidden leaf. As they continued working, Takeshi felt a sense of warmth and camaraderie. Moving in with Mikoto and Fugaku was a big step, but having Itake and Shisui by his side made it feel less daunting. After a few trips back and forth, they finally had all of Takeshi's belongings packed and ready to go. Shisui wiped the sweat from his brow dramatically. Phew. That was a workout. Who knew you had so much stuff, Takeshi? Takeshi shook his head with a smile. Thanks for the help, Shisui. I couldn't have done it without you too. Actually, I totally could have done it, but I won't say no to free labor. That's what friends are for, Itake said simply, his eyes reflecting a quiet determination. Let's get everything to our house. My mom has been looking forward to this. As they made their way to the Uchiha compound, Shisui continued to entertain them with his antics, juggling a few small items and making exaggerated faces. Takeshi couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for having such supportive friends. When they arrived at Mikoto and Fugaku's house, Mikoto greeted them warmly. Welcome, Takeshi. We're so glad to have you with us. Thank you, Itaki, Shisui, for helping out. Fugaku nodded in agreement. Yes, thank you. Takeshi, consider this your home now. Takeshi offered them a faint smile. Thank you, Lady Mikoto, Lord Fugaku. I really appreciate it. As they settled in, Shisui flopped onto the couch dramatically. Ah, moving is exhausting. Who's up for some snacks? Mikoto chuckled, shaking her head, beaming at the fact Takeshi had finally decided to move with them. I'll bring some snacks. You all deserve it. Itaki, always the voice of reason, added, and maybe some tea to go with it. Tea. Shisui muttered, looking at Itaki like he had grown a second head. You really are an old man in disguise, aren't you? Despite the jab, Itaki simply shrugged, a small smirk gracing his usually stoic features. What's wrong with appreciating a good cup of tea? Chapter 38, Chapter 35, I'm bored, let's graduate. Arita Takeshi, POV. The morning sun filtered through the trees as I met up with Itaki in our usual training spot in the forest. Like usual, we weren't at the academy. We had both grown tired of the mundane lessons and repetitive drills that were below us. In fact, the academy was so mundane compared to our usual training that I had decided to bring up an idea that had been simmering in my mind for a while. Itaki, I began, stretching my arms above my head, what do you think about taking the graduation test early? Itaki paused in his stretching, raising an eyebrow at me. Graduation test? We've only been in the academy for a few months, Takeshi. Yeah, I know, I said, shrugging, a faint smile on my face. But let's be honest, the academy is beyond boring. We're both way ahead of the curriculum. We practically never go in person, 99% of the time sending shadow clones to cover for us. Itaki's lips twitched into a small smile. True. Our clones probably know more about the academy's day-to-day life than we do. My clones hated me for sending them to the academy. Not only did they have to deal with the boring aspects of it all, but also with the fangirls. I had no idea how I had even acquired them. I wasn't exactly friendly, and more often than not, I just ignored everyone unless forced to do otherwise by the teacher. Itaki had fangirls as well, but he was more polite and friendly than me, so it made more sense with him. Exactly, I replied, grinning. So why not take the test and move on to something more challenging? We've already mastered everything they're teaching and will teach. We did it before even entering the academy. Itaki tilted his head, considering my words for a moment before speaking. It's not a matter of capability. I know we can pass the test without breaking a sweat. But there's more to think about than just passing. We've only been there for a few months. Wouldn't it look suspicious if we suddenly graduated? I shrugged again. Maybe. But it's not like we're hiding our abilities. Everyone knows we're ahead of the class. They call us the geniuses of our generation. And besides, wouldn't it be more suspicious if we kept hanging around, obviously bored and disinterested? Itaki frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. I see your point. But the academy isn't just about learning jutsu and techniques. It's also about building relationships and understanding our peers. I looked at him with an expression that said, really? Yeah, I get that. But again, we send shadow clones to the academy. If that's the point of the academy, we are already breaking it. Plus, let's say you are right. After graduating, we would join a team and start real missions, gaining actual experience, and the interaction part you speak of. Itaki's expression grew more serious. If we take the exam, we would pass. Once we're out in the field, the risks become real. The life of a shinobi is dangerous. We would be sent on missions that could put us in real harm's way. Are you ready for that? I looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. I get that, Itaki. I know the risks. But isn't that the point? To face those challenges head-on and prove we can handle it. Itaki nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I suppose you're right. Experience is invaluable, and we're both more than ready for it. But we need to approach this carefully. We can't just demand to graduate early. We need to prove we're ready in a way that leaves no room for doubt. Itaki, our academic average in all subjects is 100 out of 100, I said, raising an eyebrow at my friend. We've mastered all the techniques taught at the academy before even starting the year, and even a few advanced ones that aren't in the curriculum. What other proof do they need? He stayed silent for a moment, clearly taking my words into consideration. Well, he finally responded softly, I suppose I have no valid argument against it. Good, one of the reasons I hadn't taken the exam was that chances were, I would have to deal with someone I didn't like in my team, but if Itachi graduated with me, things would be bearable. Third-person POV. Ninja Academy. The classroom buzzed with the usual chatter of kids as the two top students, Uchiha Itachi and Arita Takeshi, approached their teacher's desk. Their presence immediately drew the attention of their classmates, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The teacher for the day, because Mr. Hagamoto was sick, was a stern-faced man named Myra Sato. The teacher looked up from his papers, raising an eyebrow at the two boys. Sensei, Itachi began, his voice calm and respectful, Takeshi and I would like to request to take the graduation exam early. The teacher blinked, clearly taken aback. Early? You've only been here for 4 months. The graduation exam isn't typically taken until the end of the academy curriculum, which is after 6 years. We understand that, Sensei, Takeshi added, a faint smile on his face. But we believe we're ready. We've mastered the material being taught and feel that staying any longer would be a waste of time for us. The teacher sighed, rubbing his temples. Mr. Hagamoto had talked about these two, but nothing suggested the two wanted to graduate early. This isn't just about mastering jutsu. The academy is about more than just learning techniques. It's about discipline, teamwork, and developing the skills necessary to be a successful shinobi. We're aware of that, Sensei, Itachi said, nodding. And we believe we're ready to demonstrate those skills. The teacher regarded them both for a long moment before shaking his head. I can't just let you skip ahead based on your word alone. The graduation exam is rigorous and designed to ensure you are truly ready. Then let us take the exam, Takeshi insisted, keeping his smile. If we pass, it proves we're ready. If we don't, we'll continue our studies without complaint. The teacher sighed again, clearly weighing his options. The classroom had fallen silent, every student listening intently to the exchange. Finally, the teacher nodded. All right. I'll allow it. But if you fail, you will not get another chance until the scheduled time for the rest of your class. Deal. Both boys nodded, showing no signs of concern about not being allowed to take the exam again if they failed. Thank you, Sensei, they said in unison. The teacher stood up, signaling the class to settle down. All right, everyone, settle down. Itachi and Takeshi have requested to take the graduation exam early, so pay attention. The room buzzed with whispers as the two boys stepped forward. Sato-sensei gestured to Takeshi first. Takeshi, you're up. The graduation exam consisted of 3 parts, the henge, the clone, and the oral exam. Takeshi nodded and stepped to the front of the class, taking a deep breath. He performed the hand signs quickly and efficiently. In a puff of smoke, he transformed into a perfect replica of the teacher, drawing gasps and murmurs of approval and envy from the class. Another puff of smoke, and he was back to himself. Well done, the teacher acknowledged with a nod, his surprise evident. Now, the clone jutsu. Takeshi performed the hand signs again, creating 2 identical clones of himself beside him, perfectly formed and indistinguishable from the original. Excellent, the teacher praised, his shock growing. Now for the oral exam. Takeshi nodded, standing confidently before the teacher. What are the 3 fundamental principles of a shinobi? Sato-sensei asked. Stealth, endurance, strategy, and teamwork, Takeshi answered without hesitation. The teacher nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips. Very good. Now, explain the importance of teamwork in a mission. Teamwork is crucial for the success of any mission, Takeshi began. It ensures that each member's strengths are utilized effectively, compensates for individual weaknesses, and provides support and backup in dangerous situations. A well-coordinated team can adapt to unexpected challenges and achieve objectives that would be impossible for a single shinobi. The teacher's eyes widened slightly at the thoroughness of Takeshi's answer. Impressive. What are the basic rules a shinobi must follow? A shinobi must always put the mission first, never show emotions, and never show their true feelings. They must also respect their comrades and protect the secrets of their village at all costs, Takeshi recited confidently. The teacher nodded, clearly impressed. Well, I'll be You pass. The class erupted in applause from Takeshi's fangirls and shouts of anger from his haters, as Takeshi stepped back, a satisfied smile on his face. It was Itake's turn now. Just like Takeshi, Itake performed the henge jutsu flawlessly, transforming into the third Hokage before reverting to his usual self. His clone jutsu produced 3 perfect clones, each standing at attention. For the oral exam, however, the teacher decided to test him even further. Itake, explain the significance of the will of fire, the teacher asked, his tone serious. The will of fire is the belief that the strong will of the people of Konoha is what binds the village together and makes it strong, Itake replied, calmly. It emphasizes the importance of protecting the village and its inhabitants, valuing every life, and fostering the next generation. It is the foundation of our village's strength and unity. The teacher nodded, clearly pleased. And what is the role of a shinobi in times of peace? A shinobi's role in times of peace is to maintain order, protect the village from any potential threats, and support the village's growth and prosperity. They also serve as role models and mentors to the younger generation, ensuring that the values and skills of the shinobi are passed down, Itake answered. The teacher nodded in approval, clapping his hands. You both pass. Congratulations. Where are our headbands? Takeshi asked, and the teacher chuckled softly. Well, we don't have them here, because, well, you guys weren't supposed to graduate yet, the teacher confessed, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. But rest assured, I will have them ready in no time. You can pick them up tomorrow morning. Chapter 39, Chapter 36, Jounin Team. Third Person POV. The very next day after their graduation exam, Takeshi and Itake walked through the gates of the academy to receive their headbands, a milestone in the life of many shinobi that had come much sooner for them than anyone else. The teacher, a middle-aged man named Mr. Hagamoto, greeted them with a mix of pride and disbelief. I still can't believe you two decided to take the graduation exam after just 4 months, he said, shaking his head. You've set quite the precedent. Mr. Hagamoto handed each of them a headband with the Konoha symbol etched into the metal plate. Congratulations, Takeshi, Itake, he said, his voice filled with genuine pride. You've both done exceptionally well. Wear these with honor. Takeshi took the headband, feeling its solid weight in his hands as a faint smile dawned on his face. Itake, beside him, did the same. They both tied their headbands around their foreheads, the symbol of Konoha gleaming under the classroom lights. Now, you'll need to wait on the top floor, classroom B, for your assigned Jounin instructor, Mr. Hagamoto continued. They will be here shortly to meet you. Takeshi and Itake nodded in unison, thanking Mr. Hagamoto before making their way up the stairs. Arita Takeshi, POV. I had to say I was quite excited about the possibilities that lay ahead of me now that I had graduated from the academy. The jump from an academy student to a Jounin was massive in terms of learning. Even if by some reason our Jounin instructor sucked, which I doubted considering we were considered geniuses by the village, and giving us a bad instructor would be a misuse of resources. But even if that was the case, as Jounins, the level of authorization we now had in the ninja archives provided a ton of knowledge that was just waiting to be used. As we climbed the stairs, my mind drifted to the eventual assignments we'd receive. On that note, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of test our Jounin instructor would put us through. I vaguely remember Kakashi doing the bell test for his team in the series, but I knew for a fact that wasn't the norm. Each Jounin instructor had their own individual test, personally tailored to assess the strengths and weaknesses of their students based on their own skills and experience. Meaning, each Jounin had a very different test. And so, a faint thrill of anticipation bubbled within me as we reached the top of the stairs. I couldn't feel anyone outside the academy students and teachers, meaning we would most likely have to wait, but a guy could get excited even without much to go by, couldn't I? The wooden floorboards creaked under our weight as we walked down the long, silent hallway. Sunlight slanted in from the windows, casting elongated shadows against the shoji walls. Itake was quiet beside me, his eyes unreadable, but I could sense a faint shimmer of anticipation radiating from him. Are you excited? I asked. Itake glanced at me, the corners of his mouth curving into a faint smile. A bit, he admitted, his gaze returning to the path before us. Though not as much as you. I nodded in agreement. He was right, I was more excited about this step than him. I wanted to become stronger, and there was only so much Teresa could offer me before I needed actual shinobi guidance. That's exactly why Jounin instructors existed, to provide that guidance. Eventually, we reached the end of the hallway, and I slid the door open, finding an empty classroom. Which was to be expected, seeing we had graduated outside the expected time frame for any class, meaning that even the kids that were supposed to graduate this year were months away from doing so. So, we wait. Itaka mused aloud. I nodded, taking one of the many empty seats. As I did so, I felt a large chakra signature arrive in the vicinity, followed by a familiar chakra signature. No. I muttered, recognizing who this familiar chakra belonged to. What? Itaka looked at me, his eyebrows raised in question. I held up a hand, tilting my head slightly as if listening to something far away. The familiar chakra not only lingered but grew stronger, more potent, and a grim sense of understanding washed over me. Our Jounin instructor, I said finally, meeting Itaka's gaze. Is Shisui's sensei? This meant the worst possible outcome, having to deal with Shisui's unlimited energy 24/7. I might need to buy some headache pills to avoid permanent damage. Itaka looked at me, then at the door as if considering running away, before he eventually sighed. I told you we should have waited until he was a Chunin. I thought he had a team, I replied, letting out a sigh. In all honesty, I never expected to be paired with Shisui. He was leagues above us and was about to take the Chunin exam in like 3 months. It made no sense, from a logistics point of view, to put us in his team when said team would be broken after a few months. And despite our status as geniuses, I doubted Konoha would let us take the exam so soon after graduating. At a minimum, they would have us wait a year before taking the Chunin exam. Unless... No. There's no way Shisui would have done that, could he? Could it be Shisui retracted his Chunin exam application just to be on a team with us? Best buddies. Uchiha Shisui. Third-person POV. Uchiha Shisui was practically skipping like a Disney princess as he made his way to the academy with his sensei, grinning from ear to ear. Today was going to be a fantastic day. Why? Well, he had retracted his application for the Chunin exams just to be with his two favorite people in the world, Itaki and Takeshi, who had recently graduated, meaning they were genins, meaning they could be on his team, meaning the best day of his damn life. Best buddies for life, he thought to himself, barely containing his excitement. He couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before they realize how much they missed him. Shisui's sensei, a stern-faced Jounin named Yamato, cast him a sideways glance. You seem unusually chipper today, Shisui, he remarked, raising an eyebrow. Is this because I asked the Hokage to have your friends assigned to my team? Oh, sensei, you have no idea, Shisui replied, his grin widening, jumping up and down. They are going to be in my team. And I can't wait for the opportunity to annoy the hell out of them. Yamato sighed, shaking his head. Just remember to take your training seriously, Shisui. Annoying your friends shouldn't be your top priority. Of course, sensei, Shisui said, though his mischievous grin suggested otherwise. He could already picture the looks on Itaka's and Takeshi's faces when he walked through that door. When they realized he was their teammate. As they approached the academy, Shisui's mind drifted back to the moment he decided to retract his Chunin exam application. It had been a tough decision, but ultimately, the chance to spend more time with his friends was too good to pass up. He could always become a Chunin next year. Why take the Chunin exam now when I can annoy Itaki and Takeshi for a bit longer? He had told himself, grinning at the thought. Besides, they need me. Without my sparkling personality, their lives would be unbearably dull. Yamato led the way up the stairs, his pace steady and deliberate. Shisui, on the other hand, was practically bouncing with each step, his excitement building with every passing second. This is going to be great. He thought, picturing their faces attack his stoic expression, trying to hide his annoyance, and Takeshi's calm facade barely masking his frustration. Ah, this is going to be perfect. They reached the top floor, and Shisui took a deep breath, readying himself for the grand reveal. He couldn't wait to see their reactions. It was going to be priceless. Yamato opened the door, and there they were, Itaki and Takeshi, sitting by the window, looking out over the village. They turned as the door opened, and Shisui couldn't help but burst into a wide grin. Hey, guys! He called out, waving enthusiastically. Missed me? Itaki's expression remained impassive, but Shisui could see the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Takeshi, on the other hand, let out a sigh, shaking his head slightly. Oh joy, it's you, Takeshi muttered, though Shisui could see the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Shisui plopped down next to them, still grinning. You guys have no idea how much fun we're going to have. I've got so many plans to make your lives interesting. Itaki raised an eyebrow. Interesting how? Shisui winked. Oh, you'll see. Just remember, you can't spell fun without Shisui. Takeshi rolled his eyes, but the smile was now more evident on his face. I'm pretty sure that's not how spelling works. Details, Shisui said, waving a hand dismissively. The point is, we're going to make the most of this. Itaka shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. So, I guess Takeshi was right, you are our teammate. Shisui leaned back, crossing his arms behind his head. Yes, and like a terminal disease, you won't get rid of me. Yamato watched the exchange with a bemused expression, finally understanding why Shisui had been so eager to have Takeshi and Itaki in his team. All right, you three, he said, stepping forward. Let's get down to business. Chapter 40, Chapter 37, Jounin Test. Takeshi Arita, POV. The sun was high in the sky as Itaki and I stood in the training ground, waiting for our new sensei, Mr. Yamato. I could feel the anticipation buzzing in the air. This was it, the final test to see if we were worthy of becoming full-fledged Jounin. I glanced at Itaki, who looked as composed as ever, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the excitement bubbling inside me. Mr. Yamato arrived with a stern expression, his gruff appearance fitting the stories I'd heard about him, a man married to his duty, as Lord Fugaku called him. He wore the standard Jounin attire, but his presence was anything but ordinary. He exuded an aura of authority and strength that demanded respect. His chakra was smaller than Lord Fugaku's, but chakra alone wasn't enough to gauge the power of a shinobi, so I wasn't sure how strong Mr. Yamato was. All right, you two, Mr. Yamato began, his voice as rough as his demeanor. Today's test will determine whether you are ready to become Jounin. The objective is simple, retrieve the scroll I have hidden somewhere in this training ground. I glanced at Itaki, who gave me a barely perceptible nod. We both knew there had to be more to this test than just finding a scroll. We had read enough to know there was always a secret meaning to these tests. Kakashi's test was to prove how willing to work with one another was a team, but that wasn't the norm, meaning I really didn't know what to expect, other than something between the lines. There's a catch, Mr. Yamato continued, his eyes narrowing. You have until sundown to find the scroll and bring it back to me. If you fail, you go back to the academy, forever. I smiled, cracking my neck. Mr. Yamato handed us each a small scroll, a kind of tracking scroll. These will help you locate the scroll, but be warned, I've set up traps and obstacles throughout the training ground. Use your skills and teamwork to overcome them. Without another word, he vanished into the trees, leaving Itaki and me alone to start our search. I activated my scroll, a soft beeping guiding us toward the direction of the scroll. We moved cautiously, knowing full well that Mr. Yamato would not make this easy. If he was willing to let us know he had put traps, it meant there was something worse he hadn't told us about out here. We navigated through the dense forest, our senses on high alert, until suddenly, a kunao shot out from a hidden trap, narrowly missing Itaki. He responded with lightning speed, deflecting it with his own kunao. Stay sharp, Itaki said, his voice calm but firm. Now that I think about it, I can't feel Mr. Yamato's chakra, or Shisui's for that matter. They were either outside my range, which was unlikely, or have a way to counter my chakra sensing abilities, and the only reason they would do something like that would be to gain the element of surprise, meaning that a fight was probably brewing at the end of this test. We continued, moving deeper into the training ground. The beeping grew louder, signaling that we were getting closer. We reached a clearing, and the beeping was now almost constant. The scroll had to be nearby. But as we stepped forward, the ground gave way beneath us. We both leaped to the side, narrowly avoiding the pitfall trap. Nice try, Mr. Yamato, I muttered, scanning the area for any more surprises. Itaki's eyes narrowed as he pointed to a tree. Up there. I followed his gaze and saw the faint glimmer of the scroll, tied to a high branch. I'll get it, I said, forming a plan. Using my chakra, I ran up the tree trunk, reaching the branch with ease. Just as I was about to grab the scroll, a barrage of shuriken came flying toward me. I twisted my body, dodging the projectiles, and snatched the scroll from the branch. Got it! I called out, leaping back down to the ground. But as soon as my feet touched the ground, we were surrounded by a thick fog. I could barely see Itaki, who was just a few feet away. The beeping from the sensor stopped, leaving us in an eerie silence. Another trap, Itaki said, his voice barely audible through the fog. No. This wasn't a trap. We were being ambushed. We stood back to back, our senses heightened. I knew we had to work together to get out of this. Let's stick together, I have a feeling we are being led into an ambush, I suggested, my mind racing. We moved cautiously, our steps synchronized as we kept close to one another. I could feel the fog messing with my chakra sensing, making it difficult to pinpoint anything, seeing the entire fog was made out of chakra. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I turned just in time to block an attack from Mr. Yamato, who had appeared out of nowhere. Good reflexes, he said, a hint of a smile on his face. I love it when I'm right. Before I could respond, another figure emerged from the fog. Shisui Uchiha, his Sharingan gleaming in the dim light. Itaki and I exchanged a quick glance. Shisui alone was strong enough to defeat us, but Shisui and a seasoned Jounin? We were heavily outclassed. Looks like we have to fight our way out, I said, a faint smile on my face. Itaki nodded. Let's give it our best shot. Shisui made the first move, his speed incredible. I barely had time to react as he closed the distance between us. I deflected his initial strike, but his follow-up was relentless. Itaki was engaged with Mr. Yamato, their clash of kunai ringing through the fog. I created a shadow clone to help me, but Shisui dispelled it with ease. I activated my wind release, vacuum blade, hoping to catch him off guard by enhancing one of my weapons. The wind-enhanced kunai slashed through the air, but Shisui dodged with fluid grace. I'm evil Shisui, fear me, Shisui said, smiling at me. Way to break my immersion in this fight, Shisui. Pushing my thoughts aside, I moved forward, using the phantom mirage, but in response, he moved faster than I could track under the fog, and before I knew it, he had me pinned. I struggled, trying to break free, but his grip was like iron. Itaki! I called out, hoping he could hear me. Itaki was holding his own against Mr. Yamato, but I could see the strain on his face. He managed to break away and rushed toward me, his hands forming seals. Great Fireball Jutsu! The massive fireball roared toward Shisui, forcing him to release me and evade the attack. I took the opportunity to regroup with Itaki. We need a new plan, I said, panting. They're too strong for us to beat individually or together. Itaki nodded, his eyes never leaving our opponents. We need to work together. Distract and divide. We just need to avoid defeat until the time runs out. Meaning we had to somehow fight them until sundown, well, fuck. I am both excited and concerned about the result of this. Let's do this then, I said, a faint smile on my face. Wasting no time, we moved forward. This time, our approach was different, we attacked simultaneously, Itaki coming from the left and me from the right. Our synchronized strikes were meant to divide Shisui's and Mr. Yamato's attention, give them too much to handle at once, until a window of opportunity opened. Itaki, now! I shouted, signaling our coordinated attack. Itaki and I formed seals simultaneously. Fire style, Fireball Jutsu. Wind release, breakthrough. The combined force of our jutsu created a massive explosion of fire and wind, engulfing the area. For a moment, a brief moment at that, it seemed like we had the upper hand. But as the smoke cleared, Mr. Yamato and Shisui stood unfazed, their expressions unchanged. Well, fuck, there goes the power of friendship. Impressive, Mr. Yamato said, his voice calm. But not enough. Shisui moved with blinding speed, appearing behind Itaki and disarming him in an instant. I tried to intervene, but Mr. Yamato blocked my path, his kunai clashing with mine, before he kicked me to the ground, stopping my movements. You're good, Takeshi, he said, a hint of a smile on his face. But you still have a lot to learn. Oh well, it's not like we expected to win. Despite our best efforts, it was clear we were heavily outmatched since the beginning. Mr. Yamato and Shisui were on a completely different level. So, what do you say, sensei? Shisui asked, helping Itaki back to his feet with a smirk. Are we done here? Yamato glanced toward the setting sun, his stern expression softening slightly. Good job, kids. Welcome to the team. Yee. Shisui cheered, patting our backs with a beaming smile. Mr. Yamato then looked at both of us with a serious expression. "There's one more lesson I want you to learn today," he said, his voice grave. "It's important to know when to retreat. Sometimes, the smartest move is to recognize when you are outmatched and live to fight another day. Understanding this can save your life and the lives of your comrades." So the hidden part of this test was recognizing when to give up? I suppose we failed that part.
Thanks for listening.